dive straight in. It doesn't work for a moment, but I will be going to Parliament Live soon, whenever my computer decides to allow me to. Go and listen to what is happening in the Committee of Privileges. Not much by the looks of things. I'm just looking at a swirly circle at the moment. So, hello, if you've just joined me. We're here for Boris Johnson, hopefully getting grilled. Here we go. Right, we just had an order. I'll put on the sound so you can hear the sound, even though I'm still dicking around with the video. The video's just disappeared. Why did it do that? I don't know. Possibly because my computer hates me. Is that why? I don't know. Oh, man. Come on. Must be fun for you watching this. Anyone watching? I don't know if anyone's watching. Maybe everyone's on Parliament TV and it's just not working. I could show you what I'm looking at, which I'm sure would be fun for you. Oh my God. Let's see. Let's turn my bitrate down to 750. Apply. Okay. There's latency in this video. I don't know why it's not just playing. Just play, will you? There you go. This is what I've got at the moment. As you can see, there should be a video here, and there isn't, which is great. Oh, there you go. There's the video. It's just appeared as I just refreshed the page. So it's got a
routinely. Inadvertent misleading, which is.
Oh no, it's refreshed because I refreshed the page. I'm having one of those days. Come on, inadvertent misleading. I don't think Boris Johnson's going to be there on time. If he is, I'll be very surprised. Not pleasantly, but just surprised. Come on, Johnson, you cock. Right, it's still loading up. What is taking so long? If I go to the BBC website, is this me? Is this me? Is this my? Oh God, it is me. Oh my God, no, it's not. Yes, it is. That's quite slow. That's quite slow, isn't it, for internet? For God's sake, come on. Oh, actually, if the BBC is following it live, I might be able to get a signal off them a little bit better. Live, Boris Johnson to face Partygate. Live after new evidence revealed. New evidence. We've always known he was a gobshite. Come on, play something for God's sake in my life. Just fucking work.
With those COVID rules and guidance.
This is working.
It is about the truth.
Yes.
And that is why this inquiry goes to the heart of the trust on which our system of accountability depends. This committee is comprised of members of Parliament who have been appointed to this role by the House of Commons. The political balance on this committee reflects the political balance in the House, which is why the committee comprises 4 Conservatives and 3 opposition.
Let me know if your sound
isn't
isn't very good, because my sound's not very good.
Having said that,
it's kind of like
we leave our party interests at the door of the committee room and conduct our work in the interests of the House. That is what we're doing in this inquiry and what we will continue to do. We are examining what Mr. Johnson said to the House about gatherings in...
Oh, there he is, the cock!
Whether what he said to the House was correct or not. Whether, and if so, how quickly and comprehensively any misleading statement was corrected.
Are you getting like clicks when she's talking?
If a statement was misleading, we will then consider whether that was a genuine error or if it was reckless or intentional, and whether the record was corrected in good time. We have already considered evidence supplied by the government, including emails, WhatsApp messages, and photos taken at the time, and written statements taken under oath from witnesses present at the relevant times, to inform us of what Mr. Johnson would have known at the time of his statements to the House. There has been much comment about whether the committee is relying on the Sue Gray report material.
Yeah, there's clicking.
We are not relying on any such material, and nor will we. Last November, we decided to collect direct, first-hand evidence from all the witnesses under oath, and this has all been disclosed to Mr. Johnson. Sue Gray is not a witness.
I'm gonna have to do it. I'm gonna have
we
to.
have followed the standing
Control
orders
Alt
of the
Delete.
House
Here
and
we
the
go.
precedents as advised by our clerks, by Speaker's Counsel, and by Sir Ernest Ryder, a former Lord Justice of Appeal.
I might lose internet here.
We have not changed the rules or the procedure. That is not within our
100%
remit.
CPU.
They are laid down by the
Well,
House.
that explains
we are bound
things.
to follow them, and that is what we've done. In our report of the 3rd of March, we set out the main issues which we will be asking Mr. Johnson about today. We'll be talking about rules and guidance, since Mr. Johnson told the House Number 10 complied with both.
He lied.
When we refer to rules, we mean regulations laid down by the House, which have the force of law,
He lied.
and under which fixed penalty notices were issued. Guidance is guidance issued by the government. For example, when Mr. Johnson was talking about hands, face,
A shot
space,
for every lie.
he was referring to the guidance on social distancing.
Okay, I'm just
when
going to
he said
refresh this
space.
page and see if it actually helps. Hello, everyone. Hello to Duke there and John Barleycorn. And don't flick the cat. Is there a message in the clicks? Yes. Help. Help with my tech. Let's see if we get this
the
working.
relevant time.
No.
Mr. Johnson's knowledge of those rules
clicking.
and guidance.
Go back to
Mr.
Parliament
Johnson's
TV.
attendance at or knowledge of gatherings that were not socially distanced and those for which fixed penalty notices were issued.
Oh, no, I don't want the bloody House of Commons.
Mr. Johnson spoke about the question of COVID compliance in Number 10 in the House of Commons more than 30 times. Most particularly on the 1st of December 2021, the...
Shut up. Right, let's see if this works a little bit better. This is the Parliament Live player.
Johnson
Maybe I
said
could
in
build
Parliament,
Graham's
in
computer,
answer to
yeah.
questions, starting
I could build
if
a
you may,
computer, I just
with
need
a
the money.
question from the leader of the opposition.
I just need the money
on
to
the
be
1st
able
of
to
December.
build the computer. Let me,
As millions of people were locked down last year, was a Christmas party thrown in Downing Street
yes.
for dozens of people on December the 18th?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that all guidance was followed completely
liar.
during Number 10. But I
Liar.
repeat, Mr. Speaker, that I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken, and that is what I have been repeatedly assured. I apologise for the impression that has been given that staff in Downing
Boris, you don't apologise for anything.
less than seriously.
Don't give a shit.
I'm sickened myself and furious.
Do you remember this? Sickened and furious, he said.
To him,
Sickened and furious. That he got
I've been
found out. That he
repeatedly
got found out.
assured
That he got
that
repeatedly
the
found
rules-
out for fucking
that the
breaking the laws,
rules
for
are not
having
followed.
cocaine-fueled
The Prime
orgies
Minister has
while
been
we couldn't
caught
spend the
red-handed.
last few
Why
moments
doesn't he
of
end
our
the
relatives' lives with
investigation
them.
right now by just
Fucking
admitting
gobshite.
it?
Yeah. Just admit
Because,
it.
Mr. Speaker,
Go on,
I've
tell the
been
truth for
repeatedly
once in your
assured
miserable fucking
that
life.
rules were broken.
Oh, right, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister tell the House whether there
Oh, did
was
Mike
a
win?
party in
Brilliant.
Downing Street
Well done,
on the
Mike.
13th of November?
Oh, more good news.
Prime Minister.
Go on then.
Mr. Speaker, no, but I'm sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
Yeah, right.
And I'm happy to set on the record now that when I said, I came to this House and said in all sincerity that the rules and guidance would be followed at all times,
You were
it was
lying.
what I believed to be true.
You're lying, you're
It
stinking
was certainly
fat
the
honey
case
monster arse
when I
off.
was present at gatherings to wish staff farewell, and the House will note that my attendance at these moments, brief as it was, has not been found to be outside the rules.
What? Yes, it has.
But clearly this was not the
literally
case
got a
for some
fine.
of those
There he
gatherings
is.
after I had
Fuckhead.
left, and at other gatherings when I was not even in the building.
Oh, I wasn't even there. Wasn't me.
Thank
It
you.
was other boys.
We need to understand
It was other
why
boys.
Mr. Johnson
It was
said
bigger
to
boys.
Parliament that no
It was the bigger
rules
boys
or
what done
guidance
it.
were broken in Number 10, when we have evidence that he knew what the rules and guidance were and that he was present at gatherings where those rules and guidance were breached. We have yet to reach our
I forgot that the Parliament
conclusions in
TV's
this
got a signer.
inquiry, and we will not
got to
do
be a bit
so
distracting. I've got a
until
signer
we
like
have
signing
heard
on top of
and
me.
considered Mr. Johnson's evidence today.
I'll have to have a think about what to do about this.
The evidence that we have already raises clear questions, and this is Mr. Johnson's opportunity to give us his answers. Will the clerk to the committee please administer the oath?
Right, while he's doing that, is he going to swear? Is he going to swear under oath? To tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Oh, he is as well?
Yes,
okay.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give for this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the
You
truth.
fucking liar! You liar! He just lied in front of the creator of the
Mr.
universe.
Johnson, you provided
Fuck
the
me
committee with a
sideways.
written submission which the committee has published.
Let's
Do
see
you
if we can get this
confirm
back
that
on
the
the
contents
BBC.
of that statement are true?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, please make your opening statement.
Thank you, Chair. If I
Gobshite.
can, before I begin, I'm conscious that we're
begin
all
being a
expected to vote
gobshite.
in a few minutes. I think at 2:21.
Right, okay, so
I
you've
hope
got
you
to
don't
go.
mind if I resume. I mean, it will break up what I'm about to say.
Well, we're a parliamentary committee and Parliament is continuing. If there is a vote called, which we do expect, I will suspend the sitting to enable members to vote, and we can pick up from where we
Okay.
left off. But thanks
Okay.
for reminding
Okay.
everybody that that's
Thank
what's
you,
going to be
thank you,
happening.
thank you, thank you, Chair.
Fuck
Well,
off, you giant
as you've just
honeymoon.
said, there were a
Fuck.
number of days over a period of 20 months when gatherings
gonna
took
make it
place
smaller.
in Downing Street that went past the point where they could be said to be necessary for work purposes.
Do you
That is
think?
wrong. I bitterly regret it.
No, you don't.
I
You don't give a
understand
fuck.
public anger,
Does not
and
give a
I
fuck.
continue to apologise.
Continue
for
to
what
apologise.
happened
You said you
on
did nothing
my
wrong.
watch, and I take full responsibility.
No, you don't. You
Because
said you didn't
just
know
said,
you
Chair,
weren't
the
supposed to be
purpose of
there.
this
That was
inquiry
your
is not
submission
to
yesterday, you
reopen
lying sack of
so-called
shit.
Partygate. It is to discover whether or not
Seems like I
I
got rid of those
lied
clicks.
to Parliament,
Shouldn't
wittingly
say that.
misled colleagues and the
Hello,
country
number
about
three.
what
Hi,
I knew
Richard.
and believed
Hi, Duke.
about those
Hi,
gatherings
Patrick.
when I said that the rules
Oh,
and the guidance
got the tech
had
there
been
in the
followed
end.
at number 10. I'm here to say to you,
What are you
hand
gonna
on
say,
heart,
gobshite?
that I did not lie to the House.
Yes, you fucking did.
When those statements
You fucking
were
did
made,
lie to
they were
them.
made in good faith.
You lied to
and on the
everyone. You
basis
said there were
of
no
what I
parties at
honestly
number 10.
knew
All the
and
guidance was
believed
followed.
at the time.
You lying sack of
When
shit.
this inquiry was
We
set
couldn't
up,
go to
I
funerals.
was
You were having
completely confident that
orgies.
you would find
People were
nothing
fucking
to
in your
show I
cupbods.
knew or
You
believed
rabid little
anything
fucking
else.
honey
As
monster,
indeed
fucking lump,
you have not.
fucking
I
foul
was
deformity.
confident, not because there's been some kind of cover-up.
What?
I was confident
Yeah,
because I
right.
knew that is what I believed. And that is why I said it. To understand why I believed it, you have to go back to a time before the Sue Gray report,
Yeah,
before the police
before-
investigation,
before,
back to a
because
time where
I
evidence
didn't know
before
that
the
we weren't allowed to have
shows,
parties.
There was a near
Do you know what?
universal
Do you know
belief
what?
at number
Every
10 that the
fucker
rules
in
and
this
guidance
country
were
knew
being
you weren't supposed to
complied
have
with.
parties.
That is the general
Everyone
belief that has
knew.
been uncovered.
Everyone!
And it was that belief
Fucking-
that governed what I
This guy
said
is a fucking
in the
piece
House.
of work, isn't he?
And as soon as it was
Absolute
clear
piece of work.
that I was wrong, and as soon as the Sue Gray investigation and the Metropolitan Police investigation
First shot
had
of Eddie, it's
concluded,
going to be a long afternoon.
I
for
came
the
to the
lefty
House of
voter.
Commons and I corrected the record
No, you didn't.
as I promised.
You said it was
I
everyone
would.
else's fault.
I
You said
clearly
you weren't
could
giving
not have
guidance
anticipated
that
the
it was a
outcome by
party.
coming
Fucking
earlier
idiot.
because I
I'm
genuinely
always
did not
supposed to
know
know
what
it's
the
a murder.
outcome
Murder.
would be,
If someone
and
told
was
me it's a
deeply shocked
murder.
when fines were issued, not least since I had been told on a couple of occasions at least by Sue
Fucking
Gray that she did not think the threshold
One of my mates
of
is written,
criminality
he's worried, he's had a
been
haircut.
reached. I believe that the committee's
Why
work
swear on the Bible?
helps to
Surely he's not
explain
that
why
religious. He is.
I was so shocked.
He thinks about God all the time
You've
while
been
he's
investigating this
spaffing his
for
mug
more
up
than
someone.
10 months,
Some
and I thank you for what you have done.
clutch while his wife
You've
is
had
getting
access
treated
to a
for
vast body
chemotherapy,
of evidence.
getting treated for cancer.
You have collected and reviewed hundreds of
what kind of
pages
slug
of
this man is.
transcripts of Sue Gray's interviews, and you have analysed many thousands of contemporary emails
Someone else
and
has
WhatsApp
written,
messages.
literally the
and
first thing he
other
does is try and
material.
command the session. Which is very
you
true.
found nothing.
Do you know why? Because he's a
To
gobshite.
show
You're a
that I was
gobshite.
warned in advance
Go
that
on.
events in number 10 were illegal. In fact, nothing to show that anyone raised
Yeah, right.
anxieties with
Nobody
me about
told me.
any event, whether before
Nobody
or after
told me
it had
that you
taken
had a
place.
girlfriend.
If there
You
had
look like a
been
girlfriend.
such anxiety about
What?
a
Go
rule-breaking
on.
event at number 10,
Piece
it would
of shit.
unquestionably
The
have been
fuck are you talking
escalated
about?
to me.
You're fucking lying.
We all knew how
I know.
vital it
I know
was
you're a lying
to
sack of shit.
maintain public confidence in the fight against COVID, that we should do what we were asking the public to do.
I don't
There's
see
only
the
one
fire
exception, of
extinguishers
course,
at
and
hand
that's the
as his
testimony
pants are on
of
fire,
Dominic Cummings,
says Mad
which is
Monk.
unsupported by any documentary
vengeance laughed
evidence
so hard he
and which
accidentally closed the
plainly
page?
cannot be
Wow.
relied upon. He has every motive to
Number 3
lie.
can't understand the word he's saying.
Not only has the committee found nothing
saying,
incriminating,
"Blah, blah, blah,
it has gathered a huge amount of evidence which demonstrates very clearly that those working in number 10 shared my
saying?
belief
That's all he
that the
ever fucking
rules
says.
and the guidance were being followed,
What?
and that I received assurances that there was no rule breaking at number 10. The best and fairest course now would be for the committee to publish all the evidence it has assembled so that Parliament and public can judge for themselves.
Really?
Despite my repeated requests, the committee has
Yeah, go on.
refused to do this.
Oh, was it?
As
The committee's
investigator,
in having
prosecutor,
problems.
judge and jury, it has elected
Judge
only
and
to publish
jury.
the evidence which it considers incriminating,
This is
and not
what
the
it does,
evidence which
mate.
I rely on
It's
and which
committee
answers
set
the
up
charges.
to find out if you're a lying
And
piece of
despite
shit.
assurances that we would
He's
be
having a
permitted
go.
to add
He's having a
material
go at the
that
fucking
we
committee
rely
now.
on into the core bundle
Fucking
published
lying
today,
piece of shit.
late last night we were told
shut up, you
that the
fucking
committee
cunt.
was not willing to publish
This
a
guy's a
large number of
fucking- he's
extracts
just a
which
fucking
I
lemon, isn't he?
rely upon
He's just a
in my
fucking-
defence.
fucking
That is
infection.
manifestly unfair.
Fucking vile infection.
Instead, and in the absence of any
Hope
evidence that I
never, ever
deliberately misled
fucking-
Parliament, the committee is trying to mount
I
an
wish you'd
argument
get out
that
of
I
fucking Parliament.
must
I wish
have
you'd get out of
known
politics. I wish
that
you'd
the
just get out of
guidance
my
was not
life
being followed,
entirely.
and
I
that
could
I
die a
buried,
happy man
buried
having
in my
never
head
seen
as we were
his
fighting
ugly
COVID
cunt
was an
face and heard his
unarticulated
ugly
belief
cunt voice
that even if
ever
we were
again.
following the rules, we were somehow failing to follow the guidance.
What?
And you have in your fourth report suggested
Fourth
that it must have
report.
been obvious to me because you have
Yes.
the photographs.
Yes.
So let me deal with this point head on, because it is nonsense.
Go on, why is it not
These
obvious?
photos have now been churned through the media for more than a year.
Yes.
And it seems to be the view of the committee and sadly
Yeah.
many members of the public
Yes.
that they show me attending rule-breaking parties
Yes, they do.
when no
They
one was
literally do.
social distancing.
They literally do.
They show nothing of the kind.
What the fuck
They
are
show
you
me
on?
giving a few words of thanks at a work event
You lying
for a
sack of
departing
shit.
colleague.
Can we jump forward to
They
the
show me
guilty
with my
part?
red
Quick,
box,
to the
passing on
time
way
machine.
to another meeting. Or
It's
heading
everyone
back
else's
into my
fault
flat
I
to carry
missed
on
the Parliament.
working often late
Honestly,
into the
wasn't
night.
me. A big
They
minister
show
did it and
a
ran
few
away.
people standing together as
A big advisor
permitted
told me
by
to
the
go there.
guidance where full
Yeah.
social distancing is not possible and where
It's
mitigating measures
full
are
social
taken.
distancing isn't possible.
They show events
Nobody
which I
forget
was
that the
never
police covered for this
fined
dinosaur by
for
saying
attending.
the armed police standing outside.
I know the
party
public
didn't
will
see or
have
hear anything.
had the
Well,
impression
that's
that these
something
were
that we've come to expect
covert
from the Metropolitan
photos
Police,
with their
because they're
sinister
just as crooked
pixelations
as
that have
these
been obtained by
coked
the
up,
media.
tough,
The vast
neo-aristocratic
majority were in fact taken by the
motherfuckers.
official number 10 photographer.
Look at the little cunt.
To say
Look at him squirm.
that we would have
Yeah,
held
I
illicit
didn't know
events
it was
in
a
number 10
party.
while allowing these events to be
I'm
immortalised
impressed.
by an official photographer
You must not believe
is
the evidence your eyes and
staggeringly
ears.
implausible. There are a couple of photos.
I would
where the
never
event
have
is
committed that
captured
murder
on
because I
Zoom
knew the
as well
CCTV
as by
camera
the
was
official
filming me
photographer,
commit the
which
murder,
only
and so
reinforces the
why would I
point.
even
If
do
we
that?
had an event with it we believed was illicit or unauthorised, why would we have it on Zoom when you never quite know who is on the other side?
What?
Most important of all,
What?
if it was
That's your
obvious to me
excuse.
that
No one
these
would be
events
that
were contrary
stupid
to the
as to have
guidance and
photos
the
taken.
rules,
No one
then
would
it
be
must
that
have been
arrogant
equally
except for you,
obvious
you
to
arrogant
dozens of
gobshite.
others, including the most senior officials in the country. All of them, like me,
Fuck off.
responsible for drawing up the rules. And it must have been obvious
You're a
to
cunt.
others in the
You're a
building,
cunt.
including the
You're a
current
cunt.
Prime
Arse
Minister.
of division belt.
Order,
Shut up!
order.
Shut
We
up!
will
Stop
now
talking, you
suspend the sitting
fucker.
whilst the House
Yeah,
of Commons votes,
go on,
and we
fuck
will
off.
reconvene in 15 minutes.
He just got cut off in the middle of his fucking spiel.
Well, as we
there you go.
expected, there
Yes.
is
Let's
the
hear
division
the
bell
BBC
that's
commentary.
calling MPs
Let's hear
to
the
vote. They've been discussing this Windsor
BBC.
framework. They've got to vote on that this afternoon. That's part of how the post-Brexit arrangements affect
Badly
Northern Ireland.
biased,
Should we not get too
conservative
bogged down in that. Let's speak to our political editor, Chris Mason, who was listening to those introductory remarks there.
Did you go to school with Boris Johnson? I bet
chairing
he
the Privileges Select Committee in the House of Commons. And then we heard Boris Johnson, Chris, setting out his stall, being very clear in his view that, look, why would we have had Zoom parties if they were illicit? Why would we have had gatherings photographed if they weren't meant to take place?
Yeah, I think what we've had in these first 15, 20 minutes really are the overall parameters of the discussion that will follow in much more detail in the coming hours. If you only catch those first 20 minutes and possibly your diary tempts you away from the television in the next few hours, you've got the thrust of what the whole conversation is about. In other words, as Harriet Harman, the Labour MP chairing this committee, said in just those opening couple of moments, that this is an examination around the whole issue of truth. That's why this matters. Can Parliament rely on leaders appearing at dispatch box to tell the truth when they do so? A couple of other moments that leapt out to me. One was because Boris Johnson will be attempting to be as disciplined as he can be on camera for several hours in a row around all of this. That brief flash, a glimpse at the watch. Did you notice that?
A few words.
He was conscious, wasn't he, as he said out loud that there was this break, this vote coming up on the Brexit arrangements for Northern Ireland, which was likely to, as it did, interrupt his
much more manageable.
And then
manageable.
From him,
the Met is unmanageable.
Pretty bullish defence that, as he said, hand on heart, he did not knowingly mislead, i.e. lie to Parliament. And then the crux of the debate that we're going to hear from him in the discussion and the argument in the coming hours, which is that he says, look, listen to the logic. If you honestly think we would have done all of this stuff illicitly, knowing it to be wrong, why on earth would we have had the official photographer along? Why on earth would we have had some people appearing on Zoom at the same time? Very striking language around his former advisor, Dominic Cummings, who has repeatedly questioned the veracity of
I think they know
Boris
he lied, and
Johnson's
they've got
testimony.
evidence.
I suspect there might be
other pull out some other pictures
former officials who worked for Mr Johnson who end up being name-checked, as they are in many of the documents, as the testimony continues. You mentioned, Martin, about us not getting bogged down in what's happening that has led to this break in the proceedings. It is just worth mentioning.
If you thought it was wrong, why would we have a photographer?
Out of his chair in that
it's like if you killed someone and did it on camera, and you could just say, well, if I thought it was wrong, why would they do it on camera?
From the conservative government that, you know, in previous incarnations he was a part of, in order to walk down the corridor and vote against Rishi Sunak's
Met Police is 5 times larger than the next largest police force
had signed. So, if you like, the Boris Johnson show appearing in all sorts of
don't fungific the cat, says the vote stroke debate. He is on statutory instruments and the government are going to use to apply
that's
the
how long we're
agreement, not
expecting
the
it
Windsor
to take
framework.
for everybody to file through the division lobbies
there's
and
a
cast their vote on that
about
Windsor
this
framework. We could spend all afternoon talking just about that.
Indeed.
But we are joined by the former Special Advisor to the former Prime Minister Theresa May, Charlie Rowley. Charlie, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. You worked for a previous Prime Minister, Theresa May, a very different character.
I bet he works
from
for the BBC
Boris
now.
Johnson, of course. He unseated her and got himself a whopping 80-seat majority. What's going through your head as a former Special Advisor to a Prime Minister when you see Boris Johnson in front of the Select Committee like this?
Well, good afternoon. I think anybody that works in politics, whether you work for a Prime Minister or whether you work for a backbench MP, you want to see trust in politics at all times. And look, there's no discrepancy about what's happened in number 10. Rules were broken, fines were issued. The question here we have is whether the Prime Minister knowingly and intentionally and recklessly misled Parliament. Now, he was just giving the start of his defence there, and that is what the committee is trying to get to the bottom of.
Did he mislead Parliament? No, he thought he was doing
exactly
the right thing, having a party when the rest
nature, the scale, the scope of briefings that a Prime Minister, Assistant Prime
Do
Minister...
you remember having to sit a metre away from someone
even on a
park
day,
bench? Do you remember that?
It's a busy job.
Yeah.
But in
do you remember you were only allowed out for like, what, half an hour a day? Do you remember the police going around giving people fucking fines? Do you remember that?
Coming at a Prime Minister left, right and centre.
I fucking do.
You're absolutely right. No 2 days are the same. Every day is different. There are always changes to the diary, your schedule. Things are put in at the last minute. Things are pulled out at the last minute. You might have to take a phone call from an international leader. You might be summoned to the House of Commons to give an urgent question or a statement on an evolving matter.
Do you reckon someone at the BBC said, quick, we need to get some Charlie, and they got this guy?
So it's absolutely right to have a number of advisors that are around you to give you the best possible advice and to make sure that they can take the calls and they can take.
He looks like that weird Belfield
fella. Life as easy
he does look like a weirdo.
Smooth as it possibly can because of the pressures that you are under on a day-to-day basis. Now, what Boris Johnson is saying today is that at all times he honestly believed that the rules were being followed in the events that he attended in Number 10, whether it was saying goodbye to colleagues that were leaving the building. That is something that the committee will want to get to the bottom of, is to ensure whether he was actually being open and transparent about whether he knew that he was those rules were being broken, because as he was saying just before you went to your brilliant political editor Chris Mason, that he was constantly assured by colleagues that no rules were being broken.
Who checks that the advice that a Prime Minister is getting from all different directions
He's innocent. Leave him
is
alone.
consistent?
Wow.
It's not contradictory, because it was very hard for all of us to keep abreast of the rules and regulations
I came up with a
that
new
were put in
word
place during
from
COVID.
January
the
6th. This is from Ernie Burns. Self-evidence, which is when entitled people record their crimes because they are so in their bubble. They can't conceive there are other people who will access it. Yeah, true. I wish the committee would raise the issue of Heathrow being wide open during the initial lockdown. Yeah, I don't think that's relevant to what they're going to be talking about today, Richard, but yeah, I mean, the fact that we had over 200,000 people die of COVID, whereas in Japan, where they have much higher population density and twice the population of the United Kingdom almost, they had about 35,000 deaths. How did that happen? How did that work? And it's almost as though we left a huge travel hub open and just allowing as many germs in as we liked, because we didn't want to upset the rich. It's 220,000 people now, Graham says. Duke Vengeance. Yeah, that's fucking surprised me. Yeah, they are entitled little fucknuts. What can I say?
I'm joined in the studio by our political correspondent Rob Watson and also Dr. Alice Lilly, senior researcher at the Institute for Government, a non-partisan think tank, and also joining us down the line is James Heal, who's the diary editor at The Spectator. Thank you all for bearing with us this afternoon while we deal with this vote on the Windsor framework. Rob, it's a fascinating
aims to improve government
spectacle, if you like, seeing a former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson in this case, in front of this Privileges Select Committee. For those people who don't follow British politics as closely as you do, why is it so important?
Like most people in the world, in other words. Well, I'll say the same thing that I just said on BBC World Service Radio, which is this is an astonishing moment in British politics because of many of the things that we've been over, but because, number one, this is a man, Boris Johnson, who, my goodness, has he had an enormous effect on British politics. He'll go down as one of the most important politicians since the Second World War, since 1945, because without him, Britain would not have left the European Union, one of the most extraordinary developments. And it also has that sort of Shakespearean quality, because everyone's asking themselves, is this Boris Johnson's Waterloo moment? Is this the moment where his long political career, his many kind of dodges and scrapes finally come to a sticky end? Because as Chris Mason, our political editor, was saying, and others have said, this is by Lord Sainsbury. It's about his character, his leadership, his integrity, his truthfulness.
In government,
I think in many ways,
independent.
You could put out the sort of thought that maybe, however this committee goes. Some people are saying that he's already actually yesterday's man. I've seen that put about, that even if it goes well, goes badly, that something of the air has gone out of the Boris Johnson bubble, and that his party and the people of Britain don't want him back. But it's still an extraordinary moment. I mean, the idea of a Prime Minister essentially in front of his fellow MPs being judged on his truthfulness over one of the most important things to hit this country, or indeed any other country over the last 10 years, and that is how on earth you deal with a global pandemic. Does that make it relevant?
Hugely, I think. Thank you very much for setting the context so clearly. Dr. Alice Lilly from the Institute for Government, as you watch this select committee in action, what's going through your mind about the way, the tone of it, the shape of it, the scope of what they're doing? Because they're acting on behalf of the House, aren't they? On behalf of Parliament. They've not just sort of come up with this as a ruse to sort of get a chance to interview.
The founder of her independent think tank not only was a lord under, well, he is a lord under Labour, he also gave the largest donation in British political history to the Liberal Democrats. Independence. And he went to Eton. Independence. Independence.
What was very striking, I think, in Harriet Harman's opening statement when she opened this hearing today was the degree to which she emphasised that and really kind of made the point that this is a parliamentary process. This is about them really upholding their own rules, and it's sort of beyond politics. And I think the sort of tone of it so far, the degree to which Harriet Harman emphasised that, the fact that Boris Johnson has been put under oath, which is something that is pretty unusual in committee hearing sessions, it really serves to emphasise the kind of gravity of this situation that Rob was just talking about.
Marching lockstep
Boris Johnson's gone back to the committee and clearly cast his vote in that Windsor framework vote.
Every neo-Nazi in the country
deliberating again. It looks like there's a few chairs still empty. We'll keep an eye on that. But James Heal from The Spectator. Boris Johnson is a divisive character. Some people will always support him. Some people never have. He was the person who delivered an 80-seat majority in the 2019 general election, and as Rob Watson was saying, got the Brexit deal over the line.
Got it done.
When, having seen him these first few minutes in these opening statements, what's your sense of how he's approaching this?
He just fucking lied to everyone.
He is capable of a great deal of sort of humour, a great deal of bluster, but his tone's rather different this afternoon.
Yeah, because
he's got a difficult balancing act, which is on the one hand he has to try and be quite contrite. He began by saying he was apologising. He obviously said previously that he was furious when he found out what went on in number 10. But as well as that kind of apology and saying empathy for people in the country, he's also got to try and be quite defiant here and basically say it's also all a bit of a stitch up. I've been persecuted for all these reasons. So he's got to get that balancing act right, and that's going to be a hard one. But because this is a 5-hour session potentially, it means that what might work for a 10-minute media interview or a shorter hour-and-a-half liaison committee session might really struggle over the next 4 or 5 hours if it does play out that long. So although you might be able to get away with a line for a certain amount of time or an explanation which could get you through a kind of 30-second media briefing, this will be quite different. I think, as you say, there's an element about playing for the right piece here as well, which is that a lot of people are watching this, but the key thing for him is in the party. Half of the party activists think that he's been mistreated, so it's to them that he's really making this pitch in the hope that when it does come to a vote for the House, he gets that he might have
I've never met a poor person. I've seen them on the telly, though. Actually, they weren't really poor. It was a posh person pretending to be poor. They were acting.
The theatre of politics. I'll come back to that in a little while. The proceedings have started again. Let's listen in to the House of Commons Privileges Select Committee.
An official photographer, then I went on to say, most important of all, if it was obvious to me that these events were contrary to the guidance and the rules, then it must have been equally obvious to dozens of others, including the most senior officials in the country.
It literally was.
All of them, most of them like me, responsible for drawing up the rules.
Obvious.
And it must have been obvious to others in the building, including the current Prime Minister. On the contrary, the overwhelming evidence which you have assembled is that these individuals believe that the rules and the guidance were being complied with.
No.
And what is so telling is the number of officials who say the same thing and the total silence of the written or electronic record
that fucker
about concerns that anyone wanted
the co-writer of Out of the Blue, along with Harry Cunting Cole,
had come here today and said,
newspaper,
here are the
Out of the Blue
emails or here are the WhatsApps that show that you were warned about rule breaking before you made your statements to the House. You haven't got any such evidence because that never happened. But if you now say instead that it must have been obvious that we were going against the rules and the guidance, then let's be clear about what you are saying.
Yes.
You're not only accusing me of lying, you're accusing all those civil servants, advisors, MPs, of lying about what they believed at the time to be going on.
Yes.
And as far as I
People
know,
knew it was wrong. People knew it was wrong, but you gave them the go-ahead, and so they thought it was okay because you gave them the go-ahead because you were in charge. The buck stops here. The buck stops with you. You fucking flannel-headed fucking cunt.
Now, everyone knows that there are some features of this proceeding that are extremely peculiar.
If everyone else was breaking the rules, it was all right for me to break the rules as well, even though he was in charge. BJ throwing Rishi under the bus, shocking, yeah. He loves
prejudicial,
rolling his £350 fucking million bus over everything.
Remarks down to the general cut and thrust of
didn't know the rules. You fucking wrote them. So you wrote flipping, but I'm going to say fucking.
The impartiality that the committee insists
back on to impartiality.
Your report.
Impartiality.
The committee is in fact supposed to be inquiring strictly into what I said about rule breaking rather than non-statutory guidance. Right, okay. So much of this interrogation is theoretically irrelevant. But I'm going to take that in my stride because I agree with what you said at the outset. It is your job, in which I want to help you to understand why I said.
I just survived. Have I missed out? No, Lee. We've just seen Boris Johnson. Well, you saw me have some technical difficulties at the beginning.
Did not.
Good old task manager sorted that
Your
out
first
for me.
concern is that I may have knowingly or recklessly deceived Parliament on the 1st and 8th December when I said that the rules had not been broken and the guidance had been followed completely in number 10. When I said those words, I was not trying to cover up or conceal.
Then again, he's a sociopath, and they can lie really, really well because they believe it themselves.
Believed at the time. That belief, what was in my head, was based on my understanding of the rules and the guidance.
You're saying it again.
That did not mean that I believed that social distancing was complied with perfectly.
Well, right.
That is because I and others in the building did not believe it was necessary or possible to have a 2 metre or 1 metre after June the 24th, 2020,
at a party,
electrified force field
at a party,
around every human being.
At a party.
Indeed, that is emphatically
at a party.
What
at a party. At a fucking party after a cunting coke-fueled orgy found at your fucking house, all 10 of them. 15? How many fucking parties were there? 18?
And it is clear that in number 10
you're
we
a
had
fucking
real
lying piece of shit.
In both working efficiently and at speed and in maintaining perfect social distancing. It's a cramped, narrow 18th century townhouse. We had no choice but to meet day in, day out, 7 days a week in an unrelenting battle against COVID. I had to call many meetings.
It was a battle, it was. I had to fight. So I was there fighting really hard, the battle.
Yes,
cunt.
We certainly did have social distancing. We avoided physical contact.
No, the rest of us did.
We gave way to each other.
Physical contact. You had people fucking in your cupboards, you mad twat.
As wide a berth as we could.
People couldn't see their parents for months on end, and your mates were fucking in the fucking cupboards. Fuck off.
And night.
Fucking gobshite.
As the guidance prescribes, we had
reasonably believed only if you have severe brain damage.
When I spoke about the guidance being followed,
I was too coked up to realise people were in close proximity. He's always coked up.
Where we were
He's drunk and coked up all the fucking time.
We had large numbers of people working from home. We had
can't wait till nature takes its course. Come on, nature, hurry the fuck up.
We had limits on the numbers per room. We had sanitizer dispensers everywhere. We had signs on the walls telling you which way to walk.
Oh, right. Which way to go to the fucking orgies? Which way to go to the orgies?
Because of the particular difficulties caused by the working environment, we had regular testing, and a whole testing system was set up, I believe, on the 3rd floor that went way beyond what was required in the guidance. So if you say...
Oh, you went beyond. Oh, you went beyond. Okay.
And be so categorical about following the guidance, what was I thinking of? That is what I was thinking of.
Oh, right,
and I know you will, as you've just done, point to the photos and then to the guidance and what I said. And you will say it must have been obvious that the guidance was being breached.
Yes.
But that is simply not true.
In a party. You were told which side of the fucking corridor to walk on, and you didn't realise that a party would break the rules. Oh,
but you have to understand how I saw them and what I saw during the period I was there.
Fucking
the vast majority of the events relied upon by the committee are events I attended for 10 or 15 minutes, perhaps a maximum of 25 in one case. to say farewell to a departing colleague. I know that people around the country will look at those events and think they look like the very kind of events that we, or I, were forbidding to everyone else.
Genuinely doesn't
give a fuck. But I will believe till the day I die that it was my job to thank staff for what they had done, especially during a crisis like COVID, which kept coming back, which seemed to have no end, and when people's morale did, I'm afraid, begin to sink. But never mind what I think, the more important point is that the police agreed. They did not find that my attendance at any of these farewell gatherings was against the rules. I obviously did not know at the time that any of these events later escalated beyond what was lawful after I left.
Fucking rat bag.
There is, of course, one event for which I and the current Prime Minister received fixed penalty notices. But it never occurred to me, or I think the current Prime Minister at the time, that the event was not in compliance with the rules and the guidance. At about 2:22 p.m. on the 19th of June 2020, I went into the cabinet room where I worked after getting back from a long external visit.
2020, remember that?
I stood at my desk briefly before another COVID meeting began and had a kind of salad. A number of officials came in to wish me a happy birthday.
Sit with our loved ones.
No one sang. The famous Union Jack cake remained in its Tupperware box, unnoticed by me, and was later discovered and eaten by my private secretaries. We talked, as you would expect,
while people couldn't
COVID
say goodbye to their departing
relatives. The pandemic.
Yeah. Fuck you, Boris. The NHS should be getting praise for dealing with the pandemic, not you and your sycophants, says Duke of Vengeance, and it's completely right. Nico says, and to think that this knob had control over the nuclear codes, corrected to knob. Thanks, Nico. It's very true. It never occurred to me at the time that the rules might apply to me. Yeah. It's so transparent. He's like a kid. He's like a fucking child who always has to have a fucking reply, always has to have an answer back. It's never their fault. It's always someone else's fault. He's a fucking pathological liar. That's what this man is. He is a gaslighter. He's a cheat. He's a con man. He's a thief. He is a fucking human piece of shit. That's what he is. And he looks like a fucking honey monster. Alcoholic fucking honey monster.
You may now say that I was being obtuse or oblivious and that we should have enforced social distancing more ruthlessly.
Oh, yeah.
And we can argue that.
We could argue it, yeah.
Hindsight
you can argue that.
Is a wonderful thing.
Oh, right, you didn't know at the time.
What I believe.
Yeah. When I was murdering that person, I didn't realise it was wrong, but now I see that it was wrong that I shouldn't have murdered that person.
I was not there.
Fuck off.
But my honest belief
arrested, thrown in jail, deported to Rwanda. That'd be good.
Based on
we'll
what
tell
I was
the
told
Rwandan government that he was teaching journalism. See how that goes down with the democratic government of Rwanda.
So many other people honestly believed that we were doing nothing wrong. And it's abundantly clear.
We were doing nothing wrong having these fucking piss-ups in my house. Piss-ups where people were fucking in cupboards, where wine was sprayed up the wall, where people were vomiting into waste paper baskets, where people were wrecking fucking children's fucking swings.
Where I positively urge him to get the truth out to the public.
Oh, bullshit, mate.
The truth out
Absolute
about that
bullshit.
December the 18th event.
Yeah.
It seems so unfair
I went to
me,
university with Jack
based
Doyle.
on what I had been told, that the event was being presented as a purely social gathering on what I knew to be a monumentally busy day for the media department.
And a racist.
And they were coping both with the emergence that day of the Kent variant of COVID and what some saw as the risk of a no-deal Brexit. That was why I was inclined to believe that this event must
would
be
have gone
in line
ahead
with the rules
had
and
Parliament
the
not
guidance.
decided to make
And
it
that's why I
illegal
said
for
what I
us to leave
said
the EU
on
without
December the
agreement.
1st. As for my statements on December the 8th,
he acts like a child because he's been treated like a child all his life. It's not his fault. He's doing his best. Got all the big calls right. Excuses for the feckle puny. He just walked into my knife backwards, really, Your Honour. Yeah, indeed, Nico. Panel Boy says he didn't murder, but his negligence, mass manslaughter, while an office still a thing. Well, it should be. Where is Nadine when you need her?
The committee criticises the fact that I had not received assurances in relation to the guidance.
Ignorance of the law is not an excuse or to translate it into a language you don't.
Based on my own experience and
Boris,
belief.
ignomania,
The committee is critical of the fact that I did not receive assurances in respect of any event other than the December the 18th event. But I never said that I had.
Oh my
the committee seems at times to be saying in
sounds like
report that I should not be relying on the advice of political advisors or even officials.
Falling over and
this is ridiculous.
Up in a bondage
I was the Prime Minister of the UK. I was trying to run the country during a pandemic.
But you didn't know
on the evening in question, 30th of November 2021, I was dealing with the emergence of the Omicron variant.
Oh, right, so you thought you'd have a party.
So
you thought you'd have a fucking party. So this cunt thought he'd have a party.
Get up and go and institute a personal investigation into what sounded like a Daily Mirror try-on about an event that was now almost a year old.
What?
I had to rely on, and was fully entitled to rely on, what I was told
there were loads
by my
of events,
senior trusted advisors.
Loads of fucking
Government
events.
would be paralysed
You absolute
if ministers
shitbag.
were not able to do so.
Absolute fucking
Finally, the
asshole.
committee criticises the manner in which I corrected the record. I corrected the record on the day of Sue Gray's final report and 6 days after the completion
of the
police investigation.
So basically up to that point,
if the committee's view is that I should have come
wrong.
to the House and provided
this
inevitably
defense
incomplete
of like
account
I didn't think I
while
did
a
anything
government
wrong.
or a police
He's been proved
investigation
to have done
was going
something
on,
wrong. It doesn't
including into
fucking
events I
matter
hadn't even
if
attended.
he didn't think
I
it was wrong.
fundamentally
It was
disagree.
wrong, and he lied to the House.
I was
mean,
entirely
that's it.
transparent
He recklessly
with
lied to the House.
I made it clear that I did not intend to comment on any of the factual matters until the investigation had been concluded. I kept the House regularly updated, and as soon as the investigations were complete, I provided a full correction of my honest but inadvertently misleading statements.
Inadvertently misleading? What the fuck? Oh man, get the fucking popcorn for this knobhead. What the fuck are you on about? Inadvertently let the House. I thought that I'd fucking followed the rules. Having a fucking party. When is this over? Asked Nico to Smith. Never, mate. This is forever now. This is the rest of the day. Stuck here with this fucking absolute clanging cunt of a man-child. Going, I didn't know it was wrong to go and put a firework up that cat's arse. Nobody told me.
It was those officials
fucking wanker. Nico, thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate it, mate. And the Conservatives can continue their scorched earth tactics. Yeah, indeed they can. Like a bunch of fucking
vaccines that made
fuckers.
sure this was the first country in the world to put an approved and effective vaccine in the arm of a patient, and it was those officials who helped mastermind the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe.
What?
It was thanks to those officials
The fastest
that we were able to
It wasn't the
come out of
fastest
lockdown
rollout in Europe,
faster
mate.
than any other European
It wasn't.
country,
You
with all
only got to the
social
first
and economic
hurdle
benefits
first.
that
That's it.
entailed.
You didn't
And
win the
still
fucking race, you
have lower
stupid
excess
twat.
mortality,
You just got to
lower
the first
excess
hurdle
mortality
first. That was it.
than many other comparable
Loads of people were not vaccinated
I'm
over the summer of
proud to have
2021
known
because
and
of
worked
your
with those
shitty
officials
government taking us
during
out
one
of
of
the
the most
fucking
difficult
EU.
times we can
So we
remember.
couldn't get the Pfizer fucking
I'm
vaccination in
proud
time.
to have given them leadership, and that is what I believe I was doing.
Bullshit.
At every one of the events in
Absolute
question.
bullshit.
And I trust that the committee
Yeah.
will be fair to them, fair to
Will
me, fair to the evidence about what we and I knew and believed,
What a
and
fucking
conclude
piece
that I
of
did
work.
not wittingly
What a
mislead
piece
the
of
House of
fucking
Commons
work.
or recklessly mislead the House of Commons, and that no contempt has been committed.
Fucking bullshit.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Before I turn to our questions, there's one issue that you raised, which your lawyers wrote to me about on Monday, and which I've replied to you this morning about. You raised the issue of the importance of the committee being fair to officials, and we would very much agree with you about that. And that is why we're not content with putting into evidence interview notes that officials gave to Sue Gray until such time as those officials had a chance to check those interview notes and to agree whether they're accurate, and then they can be supported by a statement of truth, which is like an oath, and then they can be put into evidence to us. If you would like to identify some officials and some aspects of the Sue Gray interview notes that you would like to
disappear for a moment.
then get under statements of truth and submit to this inquiry. The inquiry doesn't finish with this oral evidence session. You are perfectly at liberty to do that, and I would invite you to do that, and we can consider it.
Thank you. I will do that. I think there are about 16 points that we wish to elucidate, and it would be helpful to do that.
Okay, thank you. And we're putting
elucidate. What kind of fucking word is that?
Letter to me, and also my reply to you this morning, so that people can be clear about that. We'll now begin our questions.
Elucidate.
Starting with those which
how is that a fucking word? Elucidate.
Are the most relevant.
You just say elucidate. I fucking hate it.
When asked in the House of Commons about gatherings in number 10 from December 21,
Johnson's such a coward,
onwards,
so scared of facing his
desserts. You told the House that COVID rules and guidance were followed completely and at all times.
Looking to the neuralizer, you did not see what you thought you'd see.
Indeed. Of the report which you'd commissioned into gatherings on government premises. You continued to maintain
honest but
that it was certainly
misleading.
The case.
Can I put honest but inadvertently misleading qualifications and references on my CV, resume, or application form? Yes, you can factually, apparently, according to the
we will put to you what the COVID rules and guidance were on
what
those
great
6
peers
days,
these are. What great examples to our
took
children these cunts are. Do you know what I mean? Just what are they teaching kids? They're teaching kids that it's okay to lie and to cheat and just be a bunch of fucking rabid arseholes all the fucking time and get away with it because of all a bunch of fucking coked up toffs. It's all they fucking
at the time.
Fucking scallies,
These gatherings took place
fucking
during
scallies.
a national lockdown in England. The legal rules enforced to prevent the spread of COVID included restrictions on indoor gatherings
is to make
of
something
2 or
clear.
more people.
Oh, he's made it clear by using a fancy word that no one uses.
The workplace guidance enforced at that time stated that there should be social distancing of 2 meters in the workplace wherever possible.
Wherever possible?
And
not
that
at a party,
only
though. We having a
absolutely
party?
necessary
Come
participants.
On. You can't be 2 meters
physically
away from someone while you're
meetings.
fucking chucking your muck
I
up
will
them
now
in a
invite
fucking
Sir
cupboard.
Bernard Jenkins
In
to ask the
the
first
heat
question.
seats of fucking government.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
So as the
We're having one of our fucking
Chair
raucous
described,
teenage house
we will first
parties
consider what
in the
knowledge
Prime
you
Minister's
have of the
fucking
rules and
house.
guidance, in place at the time of each
This
of the
would be
events
bad enough if
you
there
attended
wasn't
or
a
of which you
pandemic
had
on,
knowledge,
but there was.
By reminding ourselves of
People
what we were
turning up
telling
with
the
a fucking
country
suitcase full of
about
fucking
the rules and
wine
guidance, and then
from
we
the Tesco
will
on fucking
ask
Westminster
about
Bridge.
those gatherings.
Fuck off.
Now, you were aware of the importance of following the guidance the government had issued to keep workplaces safe. Indeed, you previously told the House of Commons on the 2nd of September 2020, and I quote, "It's very important that we get people back into the workplace in a COVID-secure way," unquote. And then on the 9th of November 2020, less than a week before the first of the gatherings that I will ask you about, you said at a COVID press conference, and I quote, "Neither mass testing nor progress on vaccines are at the present time a substitute for the national restrictions, for social distancing and all the rest. So it is all the more important to follow the rules," unquote. And at the press conferences over this period, you regularly repeated the phrase,
with the questioning
hands,
of civil service
face,
notes.
space, while standing at podiums.
He has
this
the best lawyers paid
So there
for
can be no
by
doubt
you
you
and me.
understood what the
This
guidance
is
and
paid
the
for by
rules
our
meant
taxpayers. His
and were
defence is
intended to achieve.
£200,000.
Yes.
His defence is fucking paid for by
On the
us.
13th of November
Money
2020,
that could be given to fucking
which
children
we
who are
saw
going
Catherine West
hungry in this
just
country.
asking about
No, it goes
on
this
the film
tough
earlier.
billionaire
There
bastard,
was an
Boris
impromptu
fucking
leaving
cunt
gathering for then
Johnson.
Director of
That may
Communications,
be a paper
Lee Kane.
billionaire, but you
This
know,
was
he could
held
probably
in the
borrow a
vestibule
billion off his
outside
cunt
the press
mates.
office in number 10.
Fucking hate him.
Between 15 and 20
Stealing off
people were
us
present and you
every
gave a
fucking
speech.
day. Every fucking
And
day.
the evidence for this is at page 9 of the evidence bundle. Do you accept that these facts are correct?
Yes.
We will now show the pictures, which you have made your comments about, but nevertheless we will ask you about them. The unpixelated photos are on page 540 and 580 in the bundle of the total evidence pack. The pictures show you with at least 6 to 8 other people standing in close proximity. I want to ask first about this gathering's compliance with the guidance.
Yep.
You told the House of Commons as recently as the 25th of May 2022, which was the day of the publication of the Sucre report, that it was, and I quote, certainly the case, strong words, that guidance had been followed at gatherings you attended to wish staff farewell, at least while you were there.
Definitely 100% followed.
But the photographs show a lack of social distancing of 2 metres, which was required by the workplace guidance at the time.
It was 1 metre we were together.
So do you accept that you were present at this gathering and that people were not socially distanced while you were there?
Thank you very much, Sir Bernard.
Answer the question. Answer the question,
I don't accept that
Go
people were not making an effort to
Go on, you lump of foul
distance
fucking
themselves socially from
deformity.
each other,
Come on.
and that happened the whole time in number 10. Actually, I think that the guidance by November 2020 stipulated that you should maintain 1 metre social distancing where possible, with mitigation where 2 metres is not viable. And at all stages, the guidance was intended to be implemented where possible.
That's got to be about fucking 10 grand per
that is
erm, innit?
absolutely clear from the guidance.
$1,000 an erm.
It was always the case that we understood that the confines of number 10 were going to make
his
it
excuses, as my friend Josh is pointing out, basically because they couldn't follow the rules exactly, having a party made no
with an
difference
electric force
anyway.
field around every individual. Now, this meeting happened on an impromptu basis. It had to happen. It happened because on November the 13th, 2 senior members of the... And people ask, why was
if he loses his seat,
why was it necessary?
I would say £2 million would be worth it.
Because 2 senior members of staff, the effective chief of staff and the director of communications, had both left the building or were about to leave the building in pretty acrimonious circumstances, or were potentially acrimonious circumstances. It was important for me to be there and to give reassurance.
Yeah.
And the salient point I would venture to make is that following
where possible,
that gathering,
so you see the 20 guys in my flat just
to me, my presence there was felt by the Met to be.
I want them to say to him, "Do you think we're stupid?
That it was a work-related
Do you think we are as stupid as you look?"
No, I'm asking about the guidance at the moment.
Yes, and I'm telling you that I believe the guidance What you've got to understand, when I looked at that...
What you've got to understand, I hate that fucking expression.
Occur to me
what you've got to understand, because you're a bit thick, aren't you? Bit hard to understand things like why I'm allowed to break rules and no one else is.
The need to have urgent meetings
cocaine-fueled orgies.
You didn't quite answer my question to begin with, because you suggested that the picture doesn't show that people weren't making an effort to comply with the guidance. I'm just asking whether the evidence is that the guidance was being complied with, and I think by suggesting
I believe that the guidance is being complied with.
Right. Okay. Because I'll come to that. Because
he believes that the guidance
must have occurred
is
to you
being
that given that they weren't
with.
social distancing at 2 meters, that they might have been in breach of the social distancing guidance, either while you were at the gathering or indeed. As you reflected on this afterwards, as the storm broke around your head, you must have been thinking, well, I wonder whether that was really complying with the guidance. That must have occurred.
So, Bernard, forgive me, but I've got to correct you on a point of a technical point. After June the 24th, 2020, the guidance was changed so that the objective was to maintain social distancing at 1 metre with mitigations where 2 metres were not viable.
I'll come to that. But I think the first point is that it's fair to say that you didn't say that we did every effort to comply with the guidance of the House of Commons, and you didn't say that...
No, I'm saying that we followed the guidance completely. No. Because you can't... right. We'll come to this in a minute. Okay. But you can't expect human beings in an environment like number 10 to have, as it were, a... invisible electrified fence
God,
around
what the
them.
fuck are you on about talking about electrified fences?
When I saw that, it did not mean to me that we had breached the guidance. It meant that we were following the guidance to the best of our ability, which was what the guidance provided for. And the guidance provides for freedoms within the practical framework of the operation or the business to decide how you're going to implement the guidance. Yeah. The measures that you referred to at the outset are things that
my mate Sean is pointing out that given most of the central London offices were empty, why were they crammed into Downing Street?
And asked to decide what practical considerations they wish
Yes,
to
you
give
can,
to
says number 3.
The guidance.
Was it an urgent party then?
that
Yes,
is what
it was an urgent party.
just
God, I
say-
hate this cunt,
do you
says
understand
Lefty
why I
Voter. I
believed-
fucking
this is the
detest
crucial
him.
thing that
I
makes this
absolutely hate this
Why I
horrible
believed when I
piece
stood
of
up on,
shit,
December
tough
the 1st,
fucking nightmare
that
of a human
the
being.
guidance was followed completely at all times.
Bolting
What picture I
punch
had in my
of
head,
beastliness.
and why that doesn't conflict with that picture.
Supertansky's
The
saying,
answer
what a
is
truth
that I
twisting
knew
fucker.
From my direct personal experience,
capital letters,
that we were doing a
fucker.
huge amount to stop
Gaslighting
the spread of
on an
COVID
industrial
within the
scale.
building.
Yeah.
We had sanitizers.
Fucking
we had,
bollocks,
windows
says
were,
number 3.
Were kept open.
He
We had
smirked
people
slightly
working,
when he turned his
outdoors
head
wherever they
back,
could.
says
We had
Duke
Zoom
Vengeance.
meetings.
I'm
We had
sure he
restrictions
did.
on number of people
He's just
in rooms.
lying.
We had perspex.
This is
screens,
this is a
between
masterclass
desks,
of how to
and,
spot
above
a
all, as I
pathological
said,
liar.
We had testing,
Fucking con artist.
regular testing, which
yeah,
went
I did
way
nothing
beyond
wrong.
what the guidance
Genuinely
prescribed,
thinks he did nothing wrong.
and which, in my view,
in his view,
helped
in his
mitigate
distorted,
the difficulties
fucked up,
we had in
inbred,
maintaining perfect social
aristocratic,
distancing.
tough, cunt
I
view.
have to say that if you'd said all that at the time to the House of Commons, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. But you didn't. And the question is that the question is about what the guidance actually
If only
says.
Stanley decided to have a wank
I noticed you
rather than concede
taking a little
Boris.
advice at that point
maybe if
on the question of the guidance. Can I just read
Maybe
to you?
if,
It's on
you know,
page 6
Boris Johnson
of the
hadn't been
bundle,
born
what
to
the
a
guidance actually
wife-beating
says.
piece of shit.
You must
He might not
maintain
have turned
social
out such a
distancing in the
cunt.
workplace wherever possible. Where the social distancing guidelines cannot be followed in full in relation to a particular activity, the businesses should consider whether that activity be redesigned to maintain a 2-metre social distance or 1 metre with risk mitigations where 2 metres is not viable. And the mitigating actions include using screens or barriers to separate people from each other.
Supertansky is always so diplomatic. She is indeed.
There were screens or barriers in the, I believe, in the adjacent press room from memory. Well, this is it
wasn't just guidance; it was the law.
Gathering,
says
which I'm thanking staff.
Absolutely. Frankenstaff. Did you just say Frankenstaff?
His contribution
like
during
Frankenstein,
COVID.
but there's lots of them who work for
I believe it was an important.
I'd like
part
to
of
say
my
thank
job
you to my
do
Frankenstaff.
That was the best place to
Frankenstaff
do it.
was the name
I
of the
accept
scientist.
perfect social
The
distancing.
monster was actually called
Sir Bernard is
Frankenstaff's
not being observed, but that does not mean that what we were doing, in my view, is incompatible with the guidance. The guidance specifically allows for workplace freedoms to decide how to implement it, and
workplace freedoms.
The operative conditional is
client
where possible.
press.
Now,
The little
do not
fucking,
for one
you know, the
moment
little
believe
piece of journalists
that
who
people
just
in number
work
10
do what they're
did
told
not
by
operate
Boris Johnson.
social
Sit there,
distancing.
little rats.
Because they
going,
did.
oh, could I have some cheese, please, Mr.
They made
fucking
great
Boris
efforts
Johnson? He goes, here you go, have some
in
fucking
my
cheese.
view,
And
to
they're
my
like, okay,
memory,
what do you want us to do? He says, oh,
to stay
you know,
apart
make a
from
big
each
thing
other.
about
That didn't mean
Keir Starmer
that
having a
they were
curry.
able to stay apart from each other the whole time. That's what I'm saying.
Literally
that
months
did not
later.
conflict with the guidance.
Nobody is devaluing the efforts of anybody in number 10 during the COVID, including you, by the way. And
gaslighting on an industrial scale.
As Prime Minister
gaslighting on an industrial
scale. All we're asking is to, I'm afraid, it's our obligation.
I'm trying to explain to you why I said that the guidance was followed.
All I'm saying is that we've got to find out, establish.
I've lied through my teeth purely for demonstration
purposes.
I want to briefly convince some police
the guidance goes on
that
to
one of them
say
was wearing a green uniform.
where social distancing guidelines cannot be followed in full, even through redesigning a particular
Look out for
activity,
Jupiter's delight where Johnson smiles or smirks when he gets away with the lie.
Yeah. You
see that quite a lot with Johnson.
All the mitigating actions possible.
Thanks to the pixelation, we don't even know whether the people in that photo were wearing
nobody is disputing that it's the right thing for you to thank your staff.
Being up to scratch.
The question is,
if you want to throw some money into the pot, I'll put it towards buying a new video card.
Your staff in the House of Commons was strictly
cheap now, considering all the fucking Bitcoin miners are out of business.
May have been misleading. That's what
just
we're asking.
keeps lying, trying to scam out of everything.
The guidance does not say you can have a thank you party and as many people
if
you think it's very important to thank people. The guidance doesn't say that.
Let's just go back over that. I believed that this event was not only reasonably necessary, but it was essential for work purposes for the reasons that I have given.
It makes sense why the law was so complex, because they were trying
I've described the constraints in which we were operating in number 10.
We had comms
if you wanted to have a rapid gathering to thank people, this was the place to do it. There aren't, in fact, that many people there. I accept, though the pixelation makes it difficult to work out exactly who is where. I accept that perfect social distancing.
The picture was actually pixelated.
Is not pixel out, sure, but the public can't see that. Yeah. The public can't see that.
Yes, but
they can. Fucking lying piece of shit.
That not everybody is perfectly socially distanced in that picture, but that did not mean to me when I stood up in.
It's not your tech. Thanks, John.
And said that the guidance was followed completely.
I always get really about my tech because it's all like 10 years old.
The guidance, absolutely not.
And it was second hand when I got it.
A huge effort to follow the guidance. That was my memory, and that is why I said what I said.
Oh no, Boris again, nightmare, says David. Dude.
Can we move on to examine the COVID rules at this gathering? As we heard in the clips earlier, you told the House the rules were followed at all times, so you must have thought the gathering was reasonably necessary for work purposes, as was then required by the regulations. We know that the gathering attracted fixed penalty notices. So in fact, the police have judged that it broke the rules. Why did you think it was within the rules?
I thought it was essential for work purposes, or at least reasonably
essential for work purposes. He thought a piss off was essential for work purposes. What the fuck?
In which
what a cunt.
Two senior officials in the senior advisors in
prime time cast iron
jobs in very, very difficult and challenging circumstances, and it was necessary to steady
Number
the ship.
3. I never did like clowns.
It was necessary to show that there was no rancour, that the business of the government was being carried on. That's what we had to do. That's what I had to do.
Bluster.
It's what you said about it to the House of Commons is what matters.
Yes.
We know it was a leaving event for a member of staff.
It was absolutely.
The photographs we've just seen do not seem to show any.
My partner had a leaving event over Zoom.
Why did it not occur to you that it at least might have been in breach of the regulations, at least because it was not reasonably necessary for work purposes?
2 meters is way too long for a
that it might not be reasonably necessary for work purposes.
Yes.
No, it didn't occur to me for 1 second that it wasn't reasonably necessary for work purposes.
Reasonably necessary for work purposes.
Say that particular thing about the way that event was actually carried on.
I really, to this day, and as I said earlier on, I struggle to see how I could have run number 10, run hundreds of officials who needed to be thanked and appreciated for their work in very trying circumstances without having brief farewell events.
One of my friends has just sent me,
at least insofar as my participation was concerned, did not fall foul of the rules.
Basically, it's about gaslighting
about that event.
Darbo,
I was not.
Which is deny,
I was there for a maximum
attack,
of 20 minutes,
reverse,
25 minutes, I think.
Victim and offender.
I gave a short speech.
Could I cut in?
What I did was not found to have been in.
I need to risk people's lives to thank them.
Because how long you were at the gathering is not a question
I understand
that Sir Bernard is asking you. And while I'm interjecting, you raised the question of imperfect social distancing. Social distancing, hands, face, space, which is the space part, is either 2 meters at this time, or it's 1 meter with mitigations.
2 meters
and Sir Bernard,
2 meters.
2 meters where possible.
2 meters or 1 meter with mitigations, which is screens.
It doesn't say 1 meter where possible.
It
doesn't say that.
The objective of social distancing is to maintain social distancing wherever possible.
Perfectly. This is binary or social distant or not.
A less than perfect, an imperfect social distancing. Because you were telling the country to do social distancing.
Yes, but so did we.
So we see that the discussion is going to be on what's the party, while the inquiry should be about.
By the way,
if the liar lied.
Up and down the country, in spite of people's observance of social distancing, there were times when people drifted within 1 or 2
Why'd you have
meters
to be a rule
of each
breaker,
other.
even though
that is, I'm afraid,
all of the
just
rules
inevitable.
apologise to the great Diane Warwick.
We had a particular problem in number 10 because, as I
RC says, does anyone think there was a picture held by journalists
we had large numbers of staff
drugs
that had to come into the building
I've seen a
because
picture
we
of him
needed
where he's clearly on
to get a variety of opinions, even though we had loads and loads of people also on Zoom. And it was not, we had as you know, because you've been to look at it. We had lots of people.
Forte's chimed in. I think he'll get bored of pretending to be contrite
spaces
soon.
where it wasn't always easy to maintain perfect social distancing. That did not mean like that space there.
Look at him getting angry. Sean reckons he's 5 minutes from bringing up Jimmy Savile.
Just refer yourself to Sir Bernard's next question, which is about an event.
There were lots of people leading critical organisations around the country, and a leaving do for everyone else around the country was not acceptable under the guidelines, all the rules. So why was it acceptable and necessary for work purposes in number 10?
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Well, I want to repeat what I said at the beginning. I understand that people looking at that photograph will think that it looks like a social event. It was not a social event.
It was not a social event.
I was partying during lockdown. They're completely wrong. That was not a party.
You liar! You fucking liar!
What I was doing was thanking staff, thanking one individual in particular for their contribution, and I believe that was my job.
So if you've been asked at a press conference,
I wasn't at any parties. There were no parties. I've got a fine and there were loads of pictures of the parties, but I wasn't at any parties. No, not me. Fucking cunt.
I would have said that it's up to
organisations
as the guidance says
the most
to
times
decide
in an hour.
how and they are going
30
to
plus for the large
implement
gathering parties was specifically cited. 10 grand fine for the organisers in theory.
Where they can't do social distancing perfectly, they can't maintain 2 metres or 1 metre. Then
yeah, he doesn't look like he's partying, mate.
He's
fucking dancing there.
That's what the guidance says.
He's
And
fucking
we did
dancing.
indeed have plenty of mitigations.
Do you have your arms out like that when you're fucking just sitting around doing work?
This was exceptional. I'm
going to run out of Jaeger if this carries on much longer. What, Lefty Boto, what are your rules for taking a shot every time he lies?
No, I said
stop
the
turning
answer
that
is
crank
to do what
in the Cabinet Office. The gears of government would seize up. You're such a fake martyr. There is a codependent bullying strategy as well. Yeah, absolutely it is. Keith says, you know he's in trouble when he keeps talking very fast. What a liar he is.
In a way that is
indeed.
Reflects
There's a bunch of people who were too close together. It was.
That will be in compliance with the guidance.
Any minute now, Johnson's going to lose his shit. That's what I hope. Come on, lose your shit, you fucking man-child. Come on.
Can I repeat this point?
This is gobshite. You guys are too close to each other.
In number 10.
He's trying to change what the rules said to make out it wasn't breaking the rules. Yeah.
Of the struggle against COVID, during which we were having...
saying I didn't know she was just 12.
Prime Minister himself has said,
obvious to anyone else.
The experience of walking into loads of rooms and finding lots of people there.
Excuse, isn't it?
It was simply part of working in number 10 that we were going to come into contact with a great number of people. But people did follow social distancing, and they were acutely conscious of it.
Again, says Sean.
I now turn to the 27th of November 2020.
He's realised that the shit hair sticker's worn
leaving gathering for a different special advisor that again took place in the vestibule outside the press office in number 10. And we have 3 witness statements attesting to a lack of social distancing at this event.
The fact that he lied. He said
we've got, and this is on page 17 of your witness bundle. We've got Jack Doyle, who was your press secretary at the time and subsequently your director of communications.
Worked for the Daily Mail, by the way.
There were certainly more than 20 people in attendance.
Between the tabloid client press and
do you accept
the Tory party.
I don't know. I wasn't at that event, and it wasn't an event that was found to have been in breach of the rules.
There's no reason to dispute it.
Well, I happen to know because we've all seen the same evidence bundle.
Johnson sycophant on the Jeremy Vine show told Nick Ferrari Johnson was having a party because he had no wine in his glass. He wasn't having a party because he had no wine in his glass. Oh my God!
The participants that.
Oh my God!
There weren't that many people now, and it lasted a very short time.
I'm driving officer. Look, my glass is empty.
That's drawn to our attention.
Oh, sorry. This is the Clio event.
Sorry, you mustn't mention any names.
I think that name we can mention. That event.
We should have done bingo cards, says Josh, yeah. I'm drinking a shot after every shot.
I was going to correct you.
Every time he says mitigations.
I was there very briefly.
Every time he says mitigations, have a shot. There's the division bell.
Order.
Let's go and have a cup of tea.
I'm afraid we have to suspend the committee again.
Let's go, I'm going to have a cup of tea. Fucking
we'll return in 15
tea time.
minutes.
Right.
Okay, another division bell rings, calling MPs to vote.
I was in the House of Commons a few months ago, and the same thing was happening while they were trying to give speeches in one of the committee rooms.
Regroup and stretch
it was like,
their legs.
Sorry, hold that thought. I'll be back in 15 minutes.
Here in the studio by our political correspondent Rob Watson, also Dr. Alice Lilly, Senior Researcher at the Institute for Government, non-partisan think tank, and from Westminster. We will be joined in a moment by James Heal, diary editor at The Spectator magazine, who, like us, keenly watching the proceedings. Rob, a lot of reference there by Boris Johnson about the nature of the working conditions in Downing Street. A London townhouse, cramped and cold, he's described it as in the past.
Fucking London was empty.
Yes, I mean, if you had to sort of sum up his defence, both the written evidence that he gave yesterday and what we're saying now in oral terms, it's that, look, come on, right? We were trying to rescue this country from the COVID epidemic. We're working, and as anyone who's been in 10 Downing Street will know, or who's sort of seen television pictures of it, you know, there's this sort of narrow kind of 18th century building that's been adapted for use by government. And so, you know, we did our best to follow the guidelines, the social distancing guidelines, but my goodness, it is very tricky. And that really is at the absolute heart of his defence. And you could sort of see rather why one of the MPs questioning him, the Conservative Bernard Jenkins, said, my goodness, maybe if you'd said this right at the start in Parliament, none of this would be happening. I mean, Martine, we wouldn't be sitting here. Alice, you wouldn't be here. Chris Mason, who's just joining us, he wouldn't be there, perhaps if the Prime Minister, then Prime Minister, had taken that approach.
Yeah, let's speak to Chris now. Chris, Harriet Harman focusing on those 6 gatherings that took place from December 2021. And of course, Boris Johnson referring there to the fact that he had received a fixed penalty notice at one point, but still maintaining that as far as he was concerned, he'd always informed Parliament to the best of his ability.
Yeah, I think we're getting really into the crux of all of this now, because what was
really going to be interesting rather than a shot class if you took a nip for each
couple of hours is the interrogation, because as central as those opening arguments that we heard before the first break around about an hour ago were, they are the central tram tracks of the whole discussion and debate. Effectively, what we were hearing was both sides, the committee through the chair and then Boris Johnson himself, setting out arguments out loud that heard them set out on paper in written testimonies and reports already. Now what we're seeing, both with the images that Boris Johnson is being shown, where he has to look himself in the eye, looking at either those contributions in the House of Commons or those still images, is the interrogation. How does his argument actually match up to the reality of what he was saying at the time? We know his pushback as far as these gatherings, these leaving dues were concerned, that he regarded them as necessary in terms of maintaining the morale of his team, I should say, in the height of a pandemic. But clearly, as is happening, and we saw it with the testimony and the questioning from Sir Bernard Jenkins, they are able to say to him, well, hang on a minute, look at what the rules were then, look at what the guidance was then, and to what extent were they in keeping. Now, on a personal level, he can say there was only that one occasion where he was fined by the Metropolitan Police. In the others, therefore, he can say his behaviour wasn't unlawful at the time that he was at those parties, even if people at those gatherings ended up being fined for whatever went on after he had went. And I suspect as well we're going to get to a sense in the coming hours of something that's always been thrown in his direction around all of this, and we see part of this in how he's assembled his defence, saying, look, lots of other people in the building didn't think all of this was obvious, and neither did I, is did his leadership of the government, of that building, that workplace, create a kind of permissive culture where things went on and were unremarkable that under different leadership may have been rather different? That's the flip side to the argument that he makes, that it can't have been obvious to him or others that there was widespread rule-breaking, law-breaking or guidance-breaking going on. Otherwise, it would have been raised by plenty of people within the building.
Chris, for the moment, thank you very much. Chris Mason, our political editor. Well, let's join our political correspondent, Leila Nathu, who is in Parliament's central lobby. Children visiting there behind you are probably oblivious, Leila, to what's happening in that committee room unless they're completely plugged in at primary school to what's happening in British politics. How busy has it been in central lobby this afternoon? Has everyone sort of tucked away in their offices watching the proceedings?
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past the younger generation, actually, to be really on it when it comes to parliamentary goings-on. But, yes, what's been happening in central lobby here is that MPs have been scurrying out of having voted in that Brexit vote that interrupted the proceedings just a little while ago. So we've been hearing from government ministers who've been out championing the fact that that vote on the Windsor framework, remember this is the other story that's kind of going on here in Parliament this afternoon, the first parliamentary test of Rishi Sunak's arrangements for post-Brexit trading in Northern Ireland. His version of that, his sort of changes to the arrangements that were agreed that were not to the satisfaction of either the EU or to the administration in Northern Ireland. This was the first parliamentary test. In the event, despite lots of talk of a big rebellion on the Conservative backbenchers, he actually won that vote by quite a long way. So we're talking only 22 Conservative rebels in the end voted against that deal. Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and former party leader Ian Duncan-Smith were all among those to have said that they were going to oppose it. It was thought earlier in the day that their opposition might attract other critics to also vote against it, but it actually seems in the event that the rebellion fizzles out somewhat, and those huge Brexit rebellions that we were used to and that we became accustomed to all those years ago actually have not materialised this time. So that was the other big parliamentary event going on that interrupted those proceedings. But we've heard government ministers feeling pretty chipper about what has happened in the Commons chamber. It must be said that one of the big implications of this deal that Rishi Sunak agreed with the EU was that hopefully power sharing was going to get back underway, up and running in Northern Ireland, because remember, it's been without a functioning government there for more than a year. That hasn't happened yet. As a result, the DUP still have major concerns about this agreement, but I think there will be some relief within government. There certainly is some relief, judging by what we've heard from ministers passing through here this afternoon, that this parliamentary moment came without a lot of drama.
We've just heard another division bell going, and so even though there's this select committee hearing that's under close scrutiny by us and plenty of other people around the country and around the world watching Boris Johnson answer these questions, parliamentary business continuing.
It is, and actually, you know, it is worth remembering that the committee is still parliamentary business. I mean, you heard Harriet Harman, the chair of the committee, there reminding Boris Johnson that that's what it was. He actually asked at the start of the committee for his statement to be postponed after the first break for the vote. He didn't want to start his statement, his opening statement, before MPs had to break off for that vote. She, in the event, said, no, look, this is parliamentary business. It has to continue until we need to break for that division. So it is a very parliamentary event, the committee that is taking place just in another part of the parliamentary estate to where I am. But of course, very big implications there for Boris Johnson and his future career. And I think, you know, as we've been hearing a lot of what the argument is getting down to, and Boris Johnson there relying very heavily on the defence of social distancing being obeyed where possible. And he's talked a lot, I think it's very noticeable, about the other measures that were being obeyed by in Number 10, things like having a very rigorous testing regime, which he says was not actually the case in other workplaces, things like having sanitations and other measures that he thinks mitigates the fact that he says social distancing was not being able to be observed all the time by staff working there. But it's, you know, it is extraordinary parliamentary event. You've got his former advisor Dominic Cummings, who has been a character in this tale. Boris Johnson referred to him by name in his evidence, saying that all the evidence that he presented against Boris Johnson should be discredited because he is out to get him. Meanwhile, you've got Dominic Cummings live blogging his responses to this committee on the side. So it is an extraordinary piece of theatre that we have been discussing all around Boris Johnson, being played clips on television of his own comments, back to him.
Hi, everyone.
That itself is quite a show, quite a statement for the cameras and everybody watching this committee. But yes, in essence, it is still a parliamentary committee taking place as part of a normal parliamentary day.
515 thank you. 29. That's a good outcome for a vote.
Let's speak to James Heal, the diary editor at The Spectator magazine.
Oh, here we go.
They are saying there, James, that
get the Tory stew, John.
Clearly Boris Johnson's future could be affected by this.
Let's see what the Tory says.
Will he
We're going from a Tory to a Tory
his reputation, his legacy?
Go on, posh Tory, tell us.
I think very mindful, and there was quite a telling moment, I think, in the committee meeting just now, where he talks about this photograph which shows him surrounded by 8 other people raising drinks in the air, and he said that he was trying to explain what was in the photos for the benefit of the audience at home, and that shows, of course, that he's not just focusing on the 7 MPs in front of him, the committee who are actually grilling him, but also the wider public and the party membership too, because he's conscious about how this is going to go out in terms of the party and his public standing as well. So although in one sense it's quite a sort of technical thing about Parliament and the Westminster bubble, there's also a whole country tuning in, which is why Parliament TV crashed earlier as well, which shows the high level of public interest in these proceedings.
Parliament TV crashed.
Indeed.
That was the problem.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought it was me.
Back in, I think, to the committee room now.
Kind of good in a way.
We'll go back there when they start talking again in a minute.
Banana open.
He's great box office, isn't he, James? Boris Johnson, and he knows it.
Yes, he's a and I thought it was very telling that unlike yesterday's legalese, very jargon-filled statement, 52 pages, clearly being gone over by the lawyers, there were some really Johnsonian touches in that opening statement and the remarks. He's talking about sort of the higgledy-piggledy nature of number 10. He's talking about the sort of laser field around him, about drill sergeants, etc. And that shows the Johnson, the journalist, that really was the rhetorician that sort of got him that job in the first place. And I think that's why a lot of people are tuning in, because they always know with Boris Johnson, he likes the theatre, he likes the spectacle. Well, what was quite telling, I think, was at the end of that,
I'm tuning in to watch a cunt squirm.
You could see a certain tetchiness creeping in, because it's gone past the kind of pre-rehearsed stances, the ground which we've all really trodden over, and now it's about the questions, individual specific incidents. I think there's a degree of tetchiness creeping in at the end there.
Yes, thank you. We noticed that too, didn't we? Watching here in the studio, Dr. Alice Lilly, Senior Researcher at the Institute for Government and Non-Partisan Think Tank, is here. It's no good getting tetchy with a select committee, is it? They've got a job to do, and they've got the power to call all sorts of evidence that they're going to then pour over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things going into this inquiry and into this hearing specifically that people were interested to see was actually how well Boris Johnson would do under this kind of very, very detailed, specific questioning, which is quite unlike what we usually see from select committees. You know, he's been asked very kind of closed, yes or no, detailed, specific questions. I think it's probably not very controversial to say that Johnson is not always seen as somebody who is invested in huge amounts of detail. I think we've seen that previously in his remarks in Parliament. And so I think trying to actually see him kind of deal with this kind of line of questioning has been something that's very unusual. And I think, as James just mentioned, we started to see some of that tetchiness creeping in. It's obviously quite a fine line, though, for him to walk. If this is going to go on for a few hours yet, the committee will not take kindly to any kind of, greater tetchiness, any sort of besmirching of their work or their reputation, and it's something that may well not go down with people who are watching.
Rob Watson?
Well, I think everyone's going to have to kind of put up with that to some extent.
I hope that banana is sufficiently bendy ground.
Yes. James and you, Martina. I mean, at the very heart, at the heart of his defence, which he's going to keep repeating, is, look, we did take these social distant things seriously. I mean, that is the heart of his argument.
Yeah, we did as best we could under the circumstances, basically saying, isn't it? They've started again, let's listen in.
Ensures workers maintain social distance guidelines of 2 metres or 1 metre with risk mitigation where 2 metres is not available, wherever possible. That condition, wherever possible, governs both 2 metres and 1 metre.
We'll address that point in our report. We will take consideration of what your...
Charlie says, always tell your mummy before you go somewhere.
That's a very important point. What matters, if I may respectfully say...
Charlie says Boris Johnson is a
what
cunt.
I believed to have been our efforts to follow the guidance, why I thought that they were credible and wholehearted, and what I was thinking of at the time I spoke.
And ask you to allow Sir Bernard
shut the fuck up.
His next question.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Shut the fuck
we were
up.
talking about the three witness
Fucking
statements about the 27th November 2020 event, which was a leaving event for another special advisor in the vestibule number 10, where there were certainly more than 20 people, and I think you accepted that. And that.
Sorry, can I come back on that?
Okay, certainly.
I think there's conflicting evidence on that point. And if you look at what Sue Gray has to say, she says 15 to 20.
But
that's all right then. I hate him. I hate him. He is just one of these kids. If you're a teacher, you would hate Boris Johnson. Because every time there's something wrong, they go, no, I didn't do it.
Evidence collected by Sue Gray has to be independently verified with a statement of truth, which is why we can't publish the evidence, the material which you've given us, which has not been accepted.
Perhaps it'd be helpful if I gave my evidence about it.
I think it'd be very helpful if there anything in Sue Gray's witness statements that were collected in the interview notes would be dealt with separately, as the chairman described earlier.
I think it'd be helpful if Sir Bernard was enabled to ask his question and you would give a succinct answer.
Right. So you'll see also on page 17 of your bundle that another witness stated that they couldn't get through the room to leave because people were standing 4 to 5 people deep. Is there any reason why we should disbelieve that?
Well, I've seen all the testimony about this event, and there's testimony from.
They were lying.
There's the Sue Gray evidence that I've mentioned, and it seems quite incredible to me that we now can't adduce what she had to say after extensively interviewing people.
Lying?
She said there were 15 to 20 people she thought at that event.
Yeah.
It's also the case that the person who was leaving on that occasion, Cleo Watson, I think we can name her, according to my understanding. She said that it was a clutch of officials and that it lasted a very short time indeed. And she said, I think that there was a speech by me that lasted 45 seconds and a speech by her that lasted 15 seconds from memory.
A 45-second speech from you. Have you ever heard yourself? Have you ever heard yourself? Jesus Christ.
The
45 seconds. As Boris Johnson has never heard himself. He's never recorded himself and then listened to it back. 45. Can you imagine him say something for 45 seconds?
My memory of the event.
Did someone ask him what the time was?
What Cleo Watson has to say and what Sue Gray had to say about the event.
Okay. Finally, you'll see on page 20,
waffle, deflect, confuse. I'm afraid I was very, very drunk.
Joked during the gathering that it was, and I quote, probably the most unsocially distanced gathering in the UK right now, unquote. At paragraph 63 of your evidence, your written submission, you do say that you don't remember saying that, those particular words, but are you therefore denying that you said this?
I don't remember saying those words, and I think it's unlikely that I would have said those words given what I've had to say to the committee just now about my memory of the event. My visual memory of the event is that it was much
video. It would be amazing if they had video. They went, and now we're going to go to the video of you to prove that you're a fucking liar.
Been looking at, I don't remember people being 4 or 5 deep.
It takes him 5 minutes to say these small words. I know, yeah.
I'm sorry.
And 4 minutes and 50 seconds of that is him going,
longer than we need, and you're repeating yourself quite a lot. Can we just get on with the questions? Thank you very much. So you're actually not denying you said this, but you can't recall saying it. That's
I think it's unlikely that I said that.
But you
that
also
doesn't mean I didn't say things about social distancing.
You answered the question. You also state in your written submission of paragraph 63, and I quote, that you might well have made observations in speeches about social distancing, unquote. So what sort of observations?
I might well have made observations about the importance of social distancing, since it was very much on our minds.
Okay. But how right would it be to conclude that you can't be sure you did not comment on the lack of social distancing and at this or any of the other gatherings you attended? Because otherwise, why would you have raised it?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, I'm just... You're not denying you might have said that what I read out.
I think it's unlikely. I think it's unlikely, given the number of people that I remember seeing. I think it's unlikely, given the number of people I saw.
It would be quite fair to conclude that
another shot.
That you did comment on the lack of social distancing at events. It's quite fair.
It's certainly likely that I would have drawn attention to the importance of social distancing, since that was very high in people's minds.
To the importance of social distancing, if everyone was obeying social distancing, obviously, it's
because as we've just extensively discussed, there might be occasions when people gathered together at high speed. Where social distancing was imperfectly
quick,
observed.
everyone! I said, Avengers assemble!
The guidance was not
for a party
followed,
with cake and catering.
About
quick,
go
down to the Tesco and fill up a fucking suitcase full of fucking wine.
You do accept that the evidence we have under statement
quick! We can only party till 4 in the morning.
That indicate that those who were at this gathering very clearly.
Why should we trust his witness statements when he admits his memory is unreliable? Very good point.
I say that some of them do, some of them don't.
And we've established that you were familiar with the social distancing guidance. You were at the gatherings. There was a lack of social distancing, so it must have been, yes, obvious to you at the time.
The guidance was briefly very
and
nearly
even more
observed.
obvious on reflection afterwards, as this whole thing broke around you, that it was in breach of workplace guidance relating to social distancing.
Very much on our minds.
No,
it was the law, the same law made by you and your
that's not correct. What I thought was that we had done our best to implement the guidance, and in fact had thoroughly.
How do you know Boris Johnson is lying?
Clearly,
because his fucking mouth is moving.
Things like social distancing, as the guidance explicitly provides for, it was not possible at all times to have perfect social distancing, and that you could have mitigations.
I thought it was a Tesco Metro on Westminster
As recently
Bridge.
as the 25th of May, you said it was certainly the case, 25th of May 2022, last year, it was certainly the case that social distancing guidance was being respected at all times.
Quick, party time! Quick, run, everyone, run!
Sorry,
we've only got till 4 in the morning.
I'm trying to. There's a confusion between social distancing and the guidance. The guidance comprises social distancing amongst other things, and what we were trying to do was follow the guidance to the best of our ability. That meant that sometimes social distancing could not be perfectly observed. There were other mitigations we put in place.
The guidance also said that only necessary participants should physically attend the workplace meetings. Absolutely necessary participants.
It said usually. It said usually.
Like his interior designer.
When you attended these events, when you didn't even know who was attending, how were you so certain that everyone there was absolutely necessary to attend these events?
Bernard, these events were, of course, not organised by me personally. I relied upon my excellent officials to make sure that we had the right people.
It was everyone else's fault. I couldn't do anything about it. I was just the Prime Minister.
Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to examine 2 gatherings that took place earlier in 2020, both of which you attended,
I did not
Mr.
lie
Johnson.
to the House.
We'll look at the gathering which took place on the 19th of June 2020. This was a gathering in the Cabinet Room to mark your birthday. We'll also look at the gathering that took place on the 20th of May 2020, which was a gathering for staff in the number 10 garden.
Yeah.
The legal rules in force to prevent the spread of COVID varied between May and June 2020, but at both times the relevant rules included restrictions on gatherings of 2 or more people. The workplace guidance in force at that time stated that there should be social distancing of 2 metres in the workplace wherever possible, and that only absolutely necessary participants should physically attend meetings.
Yep.
I'll now invite Yvonne Fauvard to ask our questions about these gatherings, and I would ask if you could, because we've already covered quite a lot of ground, if you could answer as succinctly as possible.
Of course.
Yeah, stop fucking blabbing. I need to talk for 45 seconds.
Mr. Johnson,
45 seconds to say. He was only talking for 45 seconds.
Can we again confirm your knowledge of the rules and guidance in place at the time by reminding ourselves of what you're telling the country? You told the House of Commons on the 11th of May that, and I quote, "If you must go to work and cannot work from home, you should do so provided that your workplace is COVID secure and that you observe the rules on social distancing." We are publishing further guidance on that.
People got fined.
You also told the House on the 11th of May that people should be limiting contact with others and keeping your distance to 2 metres apart where possible. That was just a week before the gathering of the 20th of May. And then on the 10th of June, just over a week before the gathering of the 19th of June, you said at a COVID press conference, I quote, "I urge everyone to continue to show restraint and respect the rules which are designed to keep us all safe. So please, to repeat what you've heard so many times before, stay alert, maintain social distancing, and keep washing your hands." You agree that those were the rules in force at the time?
Yes, thank you.
Virus.
Let's turn first to the gathering of the 19th of June 2020, where breaches of both the COVID rules and the guidance are an issue. We'll show pictures of this gathering on the screen, and the unpixelated photos are on page 359 and 414 in bundle 1 of the total evidence.
Boris Johnson, the Gish Gallops.
The pictures show
Shyster.
that you attended a gathering in the Cabinet Room on this date to mark your birthday, with at least 17 other people in attendance. Now, the attendees included your wife and your interior designer, didn't they?
Yeah.
They certainly included my wife and son, and yes, there was a contractor who was working in the building.
Contractors.
Popped her head round the door very briefly.
Popped her head round the door.
So there was your wife and your interior designer were present, and you were issued with a fixed penalty notice for this event. And you've just confirmed that at least 2 people attended who were not work colleagues. Why did you think this was reasonably necessary for work purposes, as required by the rules at the time?
But this was an event that took place, as you say, on my
Paul's washing his hands, a responsibility.
External visit.
Exactly.
I thought it was reasonably necessary for work purposes because I was standing at my desk surrounded by officials who'd been asked to come and wish me a happy birthday. I'd only recently recovered from an illness, from COVID, and it seemed to me to be
he died. No one believes
a perfectly proper thing to do.
No
we were
one
about to have
believes it
another meeting,
anymore.
and they were very largely the same officials.
No one believes it.
And presumably your wife and the contractor were not attending that meeting.
It is one of the peculiarities of number 10 that that the Prime Minister and his family live in the same building. And
do you need a TV licence now? It's freely available on Parliament TV.
My understanding of the rules is that the Prime Minister's family is entitled to use that building and use every part of it.
Ambushed by cakes is an
Turning now to the guidance in respect of that
occupational
event.
hazard
the
for
COVID
clowns.
workplace guidance then in place said that workplace meetings should be socially distanced and only attended by those whose participation was absolutely necessary.
Absolutely.
Now, the 2 pictures we see on the screen show the gathering wasn't socially distanced and it was attended by people who were not absolutely necessary to be there.
Clive,
so
that's the plot of Lord of the Rings.
To you that the event was in breach
Where have you really been?
And it's a measure of how unobvious it was to me that this was any kind of breach at all, that we actually, or the press office, actually publicised this meeting in the Times newspaper, briefed it out, as I said earlier on, with a slightly embellished account.
A slightly embellished account?
I'd had absolutely no sense while this event was taking place, and indeed...
I don't think we heard about this at the time.
Later on, at any time, that this event was in contravention of either the rules or the guidance, nor did anybody,
just got my reference
before I spoke in the House of Commons, suggest to me that it was. And I think that the then Chancellor, who also received an FPN, would have been just as surprised as I was.
So you didn't reflect on the event afterwards as to whether it was in both rules and guidance before you spoke in the House of Commons?
No, I didn't. And that's because it was a long time ago. I'm afraid it had entirely slipped my mind. And I thought it was a completely innocent event. It was a very brief event. I'm standing at the desk at the place I would have normally sat.
Lovely. I'm doing this out of sense of duty, not fun.
As being anything
and all you help, of course. Yeah, that's the way I feel about it. Do
event.
you know what I mean? I feel like I'm sharing the pain of having to listen to this
Can we now
lying
turn to the 20th
fucking
of
piece
May
of shit.
2020, and that was a gathering in the number 10
It is
garden
important
for
Oh,
that we
staff.
record that he is a
With
piece of
evidence
shit.
that you were present at this gathering while
Evidence
you were
that
there,
he is a
there
piece
were
of
up to
shit.
40 people also
Wow,
there.
40
and at
people.
this time, a gathering had
40.
to be essential for work purposes to be within the
40
regulations.
fucking people.
Now, we've got evidence that the email invitation for this gathering, which was sent by your principal private secretary, Martin Reynolds, was sent to 200-odd people.
200
and that it
people.
encouraged staff who attended to bring their own alcohol. That's on page 35 of your bundle. Did you see the invitation email at any time before it was made public?
No.
You didn't see the email itself, but were you aware that the email was sent to 200-odd people and invited staff to bring their own alcohol? So what was your understanding of the purpose of the gathering?
To thank staff who'd been working very hard on COVID, and it seemed to me, I think I was told about it only shortly before.
Working very hard, having conversations.
Before I was ushered out into it. The purpose of it was
typical
to
Rich. They think
to
working
thank them
hard
in,
is having a
in
conversation and sending an email.
Obviously, a ventilated area in the garden.
Did you discuss the purpose of the gathering with any officials
press office.
before it took
The job
place?
is to literally write a press release every day.
I don't remember it. I think I would have been told
a day.
The COVID team is gathering outside. It's been a very tough time. This was a day when the cabinet secretary had just stepped down. I think the civil servants needed to feel that, as I said, in respect of another event, that the business of government was being carried on, and they needed to feel thanked and motivated for their work, and that's what I did.
You were aware of the gathering before it took place?
Briefly, yes, but I think it was one of those things where, as I think Sue Gray may point out in her report, I don't know what value we now attach to it, but when you're Prime Minister, you move around, quite rightly, your officials give you the next thing to do, and you go and do it, and this was the next thing to do. I then went and had a telephone audience with Her Majesty.
With evidence that some officials and advisors felt the event shouldn't go ahead. On page 34 of your bundle, your then Director of Communications, Lee Kane, describes the tone of the email invitation as clearly social and in breach of COVID guidance, and says he raised concern about it with Martin Reynolds. Another official gave us evidence saying, and I quote, "I heard there were so many people who were unhappy about the party that they were not going to go. And they themselves said to another official that they thought it was madness." That evidence is on page 38 of your bundle. Were any concerns about the gathering's compliance with COVID rules or guidance raised directly with you at the time?
No, and the individual that you mentioned who raised concerns, Lee, was, if you read what he says, he was concerned about the optics, not about the rules.
Didn't give a shit.
And he himself attended the event, and certainly no concerns were raised with me.
The event had been within the rules. Why was he concerned about the optics?
I think I can't say. I think he was concerned about the impression that people might gain if they looked over the garden wall, if they were coming from the media room and thought that we were doing something that other people weren't allowed to do. And in my opening remarks, I made clear that I can see why people might have felt that way. But as I told the House when I came to report on that event, I still believe it was within the guidance and within the rules.
No, you don't.
Did Lee Kane discuss or raise concerns about the gathering with you at the time? And his evidence
We had to put Boris in jail. Yeah, indeed.
He said, I quote, "I don't recall if I personally had a conversation with the PM about the garden party, but it would have been highly unusual for me not to have raised a potentially serious communications risk with the PM directly."
And if he had thought, and if Dominic Cummings had thought that this thing really was against the rules and should not go ahead.
Why did Dom do this to me? Why, Dom? Why did you betray me?
Martin Reynolds discuss or raise any concerns about the gathering with you at the time? As again, his evidence suggests to us he may well have done. He said it's possible he raised concerns with you.
No, not that I can remember, no.
Oh, not that I can remember.
Were you otherwise aware of any concerns from what you've heard or read either
Not that I can remember.
or after the gathering took place?
Not that I can remember.
As I told the House of Commons about, and I gave quite a long series of remarks about this event. When I walked out into the garden, it seemed to me
switching from the BBC to French radio has made me realise how lowbrow and dumbed down the BBC is these days.
From
it really
pages
is.
34, 40 and 41 of your bundle, we have evidence that trestle tables were set up on which alcohol was laid out, and that the attendees included your wife, as well as advisors who were not from Number 10, but from other government departments.
Oh, really?
Did
That's
you
interesting.
see that when you were at the gathering?
I had no hand in organising this. When you talk about trestle tables and so on, it was.
I didn't put out the trestle tables. Sorry, Millicent.
Sorry.
Permit me, if you would.
I got some little people to do that.
She was not asking whether you organised the trestle tables with the alcohol on it. She was asking whether you saw the trestle tables with the alcohol.
I did see. I don't remember what exactly was on the trestle tables. I remember going around and thanking staff for what they were doing during COVID. Now, it is perfectly possible that my wife was in the garden as well, but she was entitled to be there. And I don't. She certainly didn't receive a fixed penalty notice for that event, and nor did I.
You'll also see from page 34 of your bundle that Lee Kane said he briefly attended the gathering, and that in his view it's clear from observing it that it was a purely social function. Did you share that view?
No,
if the optics look bad,
then
why'd you go ahead anyway?
Because
it's like walking outside naked when it's -10.
And therefore
nakedness turning heads should be a warning before catching hypothermia. Indeed.
The Metropolitan Police have confirmed that fixed penalty notices were issued in relation to that gathering, so we know it breached the COVID regulations. We know that you knew what the regulations were, and we know you were in attendance. So it would have been obvious to you when you were there that the gathering was not essential for work purposes and was partially a social event, wouldn't it?
No, and I actually...
No, it was essential. It was essential. We all had drinks in the garden.
I want to...
Alcohol. Essential alcohol. By divine right to go to the pub during a lockdown, during a fucking pandemic. It was in the Magna Carta, for God's sake. To the Magna Carta. To the Magna Carta!
Two people who had... not a good enough reason to come in from home to that gathering.
You've got not a good reason to fucking just be doing anything right now, mate.
But my firm impression, I think it's certainly still the case that Martin Reynolds believes that gathering was within the rules and indeed within the guidance.
Yeah, sure. Whatever you say.
Would you have advised anyone else in the country, if they'd asked you at one of the press conferences at that time, to have a large social gathering in the garden?
It was not a large social gathering. It was a gathering intended.
It was large. It really was a large gathering. We weren't allowed to see our parents. We weren't allowed to see our parents, you cunt.
Do not know what they are talking
Fuck off.
People
Go on.
say that
we weren't allowed to see our parents. We weren't allowed to go to our friends' funerals.
Are quite wrong. My purpose.
But you were allowed to have a party, so long as you didn't know it was a party. Could we have had more people at a funeral if we pretended we didn't know it was a funeral?
Also, a very difficult day.
It's absolutely necessary that 250 people were at that funeral. It's absolutely necessary.
Do you think, Mr. Johnson, that exceptions applied in Number 10 to workplace rules and social distancing guidelines that didn't apply to the hospitals and the care homes, workplaces that were also operating under incredibly difficult and challenging circumstances?
Of course not.
Yeah.
And
didn't count
that's why we continued.
Doesn't apply to him. The rules don't apply to him.
Stipulations that
That's what his head teacher said back in fucking Eton.
With Sir Bernard about following the guidance.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'll now hand back to the chair.
Thank you. To complete this section of our questions, we'll look at two gatherings that took place at the end of 2020 and the start of 2021.
He's not doing very well, is he?
The first we'll look at took place on the 14th of January.
Looking like a fucking liar to me. Is he looking like a liar to you?
For two officials held
you had the knife in your hand and plunged into your victim, so you knew it was murder.
The next one we'll
no,
look
I had
at
a knife
was a
to go into
Christmas
victim,
gathering in
but
the vestibule
it was not murder. It was work-related. Yeah, Bernie.
At the time of both gatherings,
it was a work-related murder
to prevent the spread of COVID.
Spread of alcohol.
Of
very good Freudian slip there.
And workplace guidance stated that there should be social distancing
Watch out for the
of
spread
2
of
meters
alcohol
in the workplace wherever possible, and that only absolutely necessary participants should physically attend meetings.
Yeah.
I'll invite Alan Dorrans to ask you about these gatherings. Mr. Dorrans.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, before I ask my questions, can we again confirm your knowledge of the rules and guidance in place at that time by reminding ourselves of what you are telling the country? You told the House of Commons on the 2nd of September that it was very important that we get people back into the workplace in a COVID-secure way.
Absolute little shitbag.
This shows you're aware of the workplace guidance and its contents.
Yep.
Then on the 9th of November, you said at a COVID press conference that neither mass testing nor progress on vaccines
Young Steve Fitzpatrick says, I retired in 2020 after nearly 40 years, no party. Yeah.
And all the rest. So it is all the more important that we follow the rules.
We all followed the rules.
In addition,
we all followed the rules.
On the 30th of December,
I hate when you see these fucking coked up toffs going, well, you know, nobody followed it, like Giles Common. Nobody I knew followed the rules, yeah, because you just hang out with coked up aristocrats who don't think the rules apply to them. That's the problem. Knobhead. Giles fucking Common. Yeah, well, you know, I'm ridiculously popular. Everyone should listen to me.
My first question to you, is that your understanding of the rules?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. My first question will concentrate on the gathering of the 13th of January 2021. This was a leaving event for two officials held in the Pillared Room at number 10. We have evidence that approximately 15 people attended. We will now show you a picture of this gathering on the screen.
Yeah.
The unpixelated photo is in page 757 of bundle 2 of the total evidence. Here we see the picture on the screen, Ms. Johnston. The photograph shows yourself and at least other people, 11 other people in attendance in the unpixelated picture. The Metropolitan Police have confirmed fixed penalty notices were issued to some individuals who attended this gathering, as it breached the COVID regulations in place at the time and was not reasonably necessary for work. This breach of the COVID rules would have been obvious to you when you were there, wouldn't it?
No, I must respectfully disagree with you very strongly, Mr. Doris.
Really?
On the contrary, what I see there is...
We're not talking about one party here, we're talking over a dozen parties that this fucking cunt was at. A dozen parties that he didn't realise were parties. He didn't realise had broken the fucking rules.
A large number of the people were actually...
He didn't realise he had broken the fucking rules.
Every day,
what a
use
gobshite.
Room for meetings and who are meeting briefly to say thank you and farewell to, I think, two talented young officials.
I wish you'd say thank you and farewell before climbing into a rocket and being launched into the sun.
It was the... Sorry, forgive me. I shouldn't mention the names of the officials. I've said they're talented, but anyway, those two officials were leaving, and it was my job to thank them and to show that their work was appreciated. I was there very briefly. I didn't receive an FPN. There's nothing I can see, and I've got to tell you, there's nothing I can see in that.
He gets so many of them, he just gives them an acronym.
Photograph that strikes me as being either against the rules or the guidance. And what I actually see, and depending on how your perspective is, what I actually see is people trying to stay reasonably far apart. You play the tape
backwards, they're actually helping him up.
That's what I see. Now, I don't know what happened later on, but I can tell you that for the period I was there, it seemed to me to be wholly in accordance with the rules and the guidance and a proper use. I
wonder what a horrible end would do the job.
Only brief.
I want to see all those who voted for them going outside and their door banging pans.
Would you agree with the gathering we received in evidence from an official who attended and who described the gathering as not strictly an event about work?
I want to see him in jail.
This statement is on page 47.
Preferably a foreign jail. Maybe a jail somewhere like Rwanda.
I don't agree with that because
maybe
I think
the Democratic Republic of Congo.
To thank staff
maybe the Congo.
Pandemic.
Maybe you could put in jail in Congo. I have some idea what that might be like.
Occurred. I thought it was right.
Stockholm Syndrome at this stage. I bet those with the massive mortgage payments will still vote for him. Yeah, of course they will.
It wasn't just the staff
he makes them laugh.
Who needed to be appreciated.
People forgive people who make them laugh. Trump and Johnson and Dejan and Bolsonaro and whoever else. It's a syndrome, isn't it, where people fall in love with psycho killers.
Would you say that is...
Oh, thank you very much for the super chat, Canal. 10 Singaporean dollars. My telly must be broken. There's a picture of most vexing flapping ham on it.
A toast. I didn't see any sign of drunkenness or excess.
Flapping ham.
And had no knowledge of... I don't know why anybody would have been fined for that event.
Singapore has just come through my computer. That's amazing. Thank you, mate. I've only got two so far, but
on the 18th
when the rest
December
comes,
2020,
it's really good.
Which we know was not compliant with code regulations, as some attendees received fixed penalty tickets.
Oh, wow.
Fixed penalty notices.
Someone sent me
This
500
gathering
from
was a
Somaliland.
pre-planned press office drinks event with cheese and wine, and was widely reported in the press. We have evidence that it was attended by between 25 and 40 people. You'll find the relevant statements on page 54 of your evidence bundle. Your official diary confirms that you're in 10 Downing Street this evening. Did you at any time join this gathering?
No. 18th of December?
I'm sorry?
The 18th of December 2020?
Yes.
No, absolutely
no. Okay. Your official diary on page 56 of the evidence bundle shows a gap between the hours of 1917 and 2024, and I appreciate this is difficult, but can you confirm where you were at that time?
I imagine I was working, I think from memory, there was this was
please have a photo. Please have a photo of him at a party on that day.
The Kent variant. With Delta, I think it was.
Just deliver the fucking crushing blow. Get him in a lie, and then show the photo. You go, what are you doing here?
Brexit. I thought that anxiety was unfounded, of course, and we didn't. But it was a very long and very difficult
meeting. He is a lying sack of shit. He is.
COVID-0 session, but I certainly did not attend that event and had no direct knowledge of it.
It'd be really cool if it's there, though.
Okay, thank you. We conducted, the Privileges Committee conducted a visit to 10 Downing Street, as you know. We established, you can clearly see from the suppressed vestibule where this gathering was taking place, from the bottom of the stairs leading up to then what was your flat in Downing Street. Your diary says you went to your flat at 21:58. Apparently the gathering went on until after midnight. Is your evidence that you did not see or hear the noise of a gathering of about 25 to 40 people taking place in the vestibule when you were going to your flat? If we just perhaps explain, there is a corridor, a narrow corridor, leading to the vestibule. Before you get to it, the staircase on the left is to your flat. Your direct line of sight would be into the vestibule, not more than a few metres away. There's a gathering taking place with between 25 and 40 people. You had clear direct line of sight of that room. Are you telling me that your evidence is that you're not aware of the noise or the event taking place?
Absolutely. And
you absolute fucking liar!
If I had looked,
oh my God,
what I would have seen, I'm sure, was people
that he's full of shit and
doing
he's just
a huge amount of work.
This guy lies as easily as he fucking breathes.
I didn't look. I certainly have no memory of seeing any kind of party or illicit gathering going on in the press room on that evening. The first I heard about this thing, the first I knew about it was when it was brought to my attention by Jack Doyle. I think almost a year later.
Page 54, 56 of your evidence bundle, you will see that this gathering was described in evidence we've received as beyond desk drinks and far more relaxed than it should have been, when people were shoulder to shoulder with each other, and that one number 10 staff member who did not attend said they later heard that the gathering had turned into a party. Did anyone tell you about that?
An orgy.
Well, no, they didn't. And this is the crucial point. Nobody
told me anything.
Any anxieties about that event with me before I stood up in the House of Commons. Nobody said to me that we've had something.
What a lying we've done piece something of shit.
In the almost a year that followed between December the 18th, 2020 and 30th of November 2021, when Jack Doyle came to see me, the thing was a complete blank to me, right?
Fuck.
The Liverpool Police have confirmed fixed penalty notices were issued to some attendees at that gathering. Clearly, the
Secco won't drink themselves. Those lines of gack won't snort themselves.
Did anyone make you aware at the time or after it happened that had not been compliant with COVID rules?
No.
Someone take it to the jungle and fucking leave him there.
Before we move on to discuss what you said in the House about gatherings in number 10, you will know that fixed penalty tickets were issued in relation to gatherings in number 10 on 2 other dates, other than those we've asked you about. These gatherings took place on the 17th of December 2020 and the 16th of April 2021. This is confirmed by the Metropolitan Police statement at the end of Operation Hillman, which you'll find a copy of on page 89 and 91 of your evidence bundle. Did you ever have any reason to think that COVID rules may have been broken at this gathering on either of these dates prior to 2021? December 2021?
So which dates, forgive me, Alan?
17th of December and the 16th of April.
I don't remember hearing. So what I can tell the committee is none of these. I was conscious.
That's what he can tell. Of fucking lies.
None of these events.
Lies.
As being
Orgy, porgy, pudding, and lies.
In any way,
Quick, I need something. Jeremy Corbyn.
Until stories started.
Vaccine rollout. He's mentioned the vaccine rollout, hasn't he?
After
Brexit,
I had spoken in the comments about it. So they weren't at all on my radar as things that I should be concerned about.
Why is it all a blank, maybe an alcoholic blackout? Yeah, indeed. How could he not know?
We've now considered the rules and guidance relating to COVID that were in force at the time of the gatherings we've discussed with you. We've considered your knowledge of the rules and guidance then in force, and we've considered your attendance at and knowledge of gatherings that were not socially distanced and for which fixed penalty notices were issued. We will now compare that with what you said to the House of Commons after media reports of these gatherings began emerging. We'll concentrate particularly on what you said to the House on the 1st of December and the 8th of December.
Do it.
We'll first examine your assertions that COVID rules and guidance were followed in number 10, and I'd like to invite Andy Carter to ask our questions about this.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Johnson, on the afternoon of the 30th of November, I understand the Daily Mirror contacted the press office at Downing Street saying they were planning to publish an article alleging that events had taken place in Downing Street in November and December 2020 where COVID rules had been broken.
Yeah.
Now, the article appeared online later that day, and it was the paper's front page splash on the 1st of December. And I think you can see a copy of that on page 58 in your evidence bundle.
Sack of shit.
I'm guessing you must have known that you would be asked about this at Prime Minister's Questions in the House of Commons the following day, the 1st of December. And sure enough, you were. You were asked whether a Christmas party was held in number 10 on the 18th of December. And you told the House all guidance was followed completely in number 10.
That's what he
Picking
said.
up on the things that you said in your opening statement and the evidence that you've given,
completely.
You knew what the guidance was, i.e. maintaining social distancing wherever possible, and ensuring mitigation was in place if that wasn't possible. And you knew there'd been gatherings where social distancing hadn't necessarily been maintained and where masks, for example, weren't being worn and screens weren't in place. Because we've seen some of the photographs there. So why did you tell the House
it's
all
a woke
guidance was followed completely in
conspiracy!
Thank you. So, I'm not certain that there was any, just quickly, I'm not certain there was any requirement for masks indoors.
Part of mitigation.
I see, I'm with you. Okay. So, the reason I said that all guidance was followed completely in number 10. And
you're a liar.
Back to Mr. Doris and a lot of the questions that have been raised.
You're a liar.
Between
piece of shit who lies all the time.
The event that took place and when I stood up to speak, in all the cases that you mentioned, nobody came to me and said, "We've got a problem with this
came to me.
You need to worry about this." And
I hate it so much. And there's no says Lord Spuggy, in
the written evidence or in the electronic record, and that is a very extraordinary thing, given how serious that was. The reason I said what I said was because
you're a fucking liar.
I thought I believed then that the number 10
That's why.
team were doing a huge amount to follow the guidance. And
you're a fucking liar. The reason why you lied is because you're a fucking liar.
About what had happened.
He's putting it all on Jack Doyle, isn't he? Poor Jack Doyle.
On the evening of the 30th of November 2021.
This is under oath. Yeah.
And it's about, my diary says it was about 6 o'clock. He comes in And he says that, as you say, the Daily Mirror is going to run this story. He mentions a few other events, two of which I knew directly about and knew that there was no, as I believed at the time, I knew that there was no issue with those. The other was something, I think it was something to do with an event at CCH, a Conservative Central Office, I knew absolutely nothing about. I asked him about this December 18th event, and I asked him to describe it. And bear in mind everything I've said about that evening, which was a horrendously busy and difficult evening, and we'd had a long COVID-0 to discuss what to do with the Kent variant.
The Kent variant.
He told me that it was within the rules.
Oh, thank you for the super chat, David Faulkner. 78 Hong Kong dollars.
Desks,
I'm disappointed most when the pants of a liar don't catch fire.
Admittedly, but that was not banned.
It's a bit of a fire hazard having this cunt in
either the rules
fucking
or the
Parliament.
guidance. It was not
lying every other fucking word.
I'm afraid for people to drink on Fridays, and I concluded that it sounded to me as though that event was within both the rules and the guidance.
Yeah.
And that fortified me in what I stood up to say the following day.
Did it?
As it happens,
go on.
When I said the guidance has been followed completely during number 10, which is actually what I said, I was misremembering the line that had already been put out to
I was misremembering. That's what he just said. He just literally said he was misremembering.
Were followed at all times. But you've got to understand that I didn't think that there was any real distinction from the public's point of view between the rules and the guidance.
Why would you?
In the sense that our observance of, let me put it this way, I didn't think that the public would make any, they would expect us to follow the guidance as much as the rules. That's why, and so even though I'd said something slightly different,
did you?
I still believed it was true.
Can I just, if you said something slightly different, can I ask you, why didn't you correct the record then? Because that would have been an obvious thing to do.
I cursed on a glass of cherry and forgot I was at a party.
There is confusion between guidance and
that's pretty much it.
rules, but you could have corrected the record at that point.
Right. I didn't think there was any appreciable difference because it was our job to follow the guidance as much as to follow the rules. And my view, as I've said repeatedly to the committee this afternoon, is that I believe we were following the guidance.
Oh, really? Okay.
And in spite of the
misremembering is still misleading. Parliament means
which seemed to show a lack of perfect social distancing.
It's all done now. You can shut up now. You daft twat. We decided. Basically, you're saying you're misremembered. That is misleading.
I was there, and I believe that the behaviour was reasonable. Given the constraints of the building, and therefore in accordance with the guidance. So that's what I said.
I know you didn't attend the gathering.
Everywhere else, you would be ripped apart. The UK, the swallow eyes.
Clear about that.
The people on the streets.
But you had attended some of the other gatherings that we've talked about, and you've just said that you asked Mr. Kane about the gathering on the 18th. So why didn't you tell the House at that point when you were asked? That there were some of the gatherings in number 10.
Yeah, I told. So it was Jack Doyle.
I'm sorry, Jack Doyle.
But
fucking hell.
But because
on Jack Doyle. It's all Jack Doyle's fault.
This goes to the heart of what we're trying to establish. I didn't think that those events were an issue. Nobody had previously raised them with me as being the things that I ought to be concerned about, and they didn't. And as I've said repeatedly to you at the time, call me obtuse or oblivious, but they did not seem to me to be in conflict with the rules or the guidance as we were trying to implement in number 10.
Okay, the next Prime Minister's question was on the 8th of December, a week later. I think it probably would have been fair to say that you would have guessed that the topic would have been brought up again by the Leader of the Opposition, because the previous evening, ITV had published a video of a mock press conference where number 10 staff were seemingly joking about the gatherings on the 18th of December. At PMQs on the 8th of December,
funny prank.
You were asked if there was a party in number 10 on the 13th of November, and you told the House the guidance was followed and the rules were followed in Downing Street at all times.
Lied.
By the
Also,
8th of December,
Mr. Doyle.
it's been a full week since you were first asked in the House about gatherings in number 10. The issue had continued to feature on the front page of many of the newspapers And as we later saw on the television,
watch your family
what did
screen,
you
get him down.
do in that week to prepare for any further questions about gatherings, to decide whether you needed to correct your previous statement that the guidance had been followed?
Absolutely nothing.
And whether you should reaffirm it?
Well, I did.
Absolutely nothing.
As a committee note,
what did you do?
I did the most obvious thing,
I could get away with.
which was when the Allegro video emerged on the evening of, I think,
I was shocked. I was shocked, I said. Shocked that there had been gatherings in my house that I had attended.
I decided that I was getting conflicting information about what had happened.
It is a masterclass, isn't it, really, of just
December.
manipulation of lies.
I was troubled by that. I hadn't been at the thing. I was relying on what I thought were the honest and well-intentioned descriptions of this from my trusted advisors. But clearly there was a difference of opinion. So I commissioned the Cabinet Secretary to conduct an inquiry. That's the most important thing that I did.
Lord Spuggy is saying, what should Sunak do? He should get rid of Boris Johnson.
I think multiple times about
Boris
the issue
Johnson's
of
a fucking
gatherings
lying
in
piece of
Downing
shit.
Street. But at no point did you tell the House that you knew that there had been gatherings that
Get
you
rid
had
of Truss as
attended.
well. She's a piece
in
of shit.
particular, the
They
five
both
we
voted
raised
against the
with
government today.
Why did you fail to
them
tell
out.
the House on
Take
the
the
8th
whip
of
off them.
December that there were
Take the
gatherings
whip
that
off
you
everyone who
attended?
voted against him. That's what Boris
Mr.
Johnson would
Carter,
have done.
you've got to understand that
If Sunak
in
had
my
voted
mind
against
at
Boris
the
Johnson, he
time,
would have
these
taken
did
the
not
whip away.
seem to me
He took it away
to
from
be
Nicholas Soames, who's
improper or offensive.
Winston Churchill's
events.
grandson, for God's sake.
They did not. They weren't in my consciousness because
Weren't in my consciousness. Because I'm a piece of shit.
I thought they were work events. As I said to the House when we came to discuss the May 20th event, and I came to the House to explain, I made it very clear that I thought that was a work event, and indeed I still do.
It was a work event. He still thinks it's a work
Having
event.
told the House on the 8th of December
Still
that
think
the
you're full of
guidance was
shit,
followed
mate.
and the rules were followed at all times in Downing Street. You then reiterated this
Johnson
the
the
following
clown.
month. You told the House
Be called
of
tit.
Prime Minister's questions on January the 12th.
Got a graphic somewhere
I
of Boris
believe that
Johnson
the
done
events
up
in
like,
question were within
Pennywise.
the guidance and were within the rules. You knew what the rules and guidance were, and you personally attended at least 4 gatherings, those of the 20th of May,
Like
the
he
19th of
gives
June,
a
the 13th of
shit.
November, and the 14th
The guy
of
don't
January
give a
2021,
shit.
for which
He
fixed
don't
penalty
give a
notices
monkeys,
were
don't
issued
give
to
a shit.
attendees,
The guy don't
which
give
hadn't
a
been compliant
shit.
with the rules, and at which breaches of the rules and guidance must have been obvious to you because
He's talking about
you were
Chewbacca
there
next. Use the Chewbacca effects.
The only FPN that I received
Chewbacca defense
was for the event
If
that
Chewbacca is a
we
Wookiee, you
over in
must
some
acquit.
detail, which was the event in the cabinet room. And I think that
Chewbacca
even this
is a
committee,
Wookiee, you must acquit.
I venture to suggest, might concede that had they been in my shoes at that event, it might not have occurred even to them that this was
massive
an
fucking
event that
clown
was
shoes.
against either the rules
Your
or the
massive
guidance. It certainly didn't
fucking
occur to me.
clown
It didn't occur to
shoes.
the then Chancellor of the Exchequer. It didn't occur to the media department. We
And if Chewbacca is a Wookiee, you must acquit.
All the other events, for the period I was there, I can only conclude were deemed by the Met to be not rule-breaking events, because I wasn't issued with an FPN.
You come down here.
Therefore,
You're
I have
flunk
two sets
too.
of events. The one, for which I received an FPN, which boggled my mind because I couldn't understand why I got it. And the others,
He doesn't understand
where
how he got a
wasn't
fixed
aware
penalty
of
notice for all the
rule-breaking at time and
parties.
believed we were following the guidance.
This is
So
not
there's
about
nothing I
one
can say
party.
to the
This
House
is
on
about
that score.
a lot
If you turn
of
to
parties.
page 61 of
This is about
the
a
evidence,
lot
you
of
can
parties.
see a statement there from the then Principal Private Secretary Martin Reynolds, in which he says that he directly questioned with you whether it was realistic to argue that guidance had been followed at all times in number 10. Do you accept that you were advised not to say guidance was followed at all times in number 10, and yet you told the House that it was on the 8th of December and the 12th of January?
No, so on there's a couple of important points. It is absolutely true that Martin Reynolds was cautious about what I should say in the House on the 8th of December, because we'd already begun the process of the inquiry. We were looking at the December the 18th event. I had received assurances about the rules on December the 18th, but I hadn't received assurances about the guidance.
If you say so, yeah.
What Martin was trying to get at, if you look at his what he says, it's clear. He's talking about social distancing and whether it was whether we had maintained social distancing within.
Oh, right, it wasn't the
number 10,
parties. It wasn't all the
would,
fucking parties.
That would be whether we had maintained perfect social distancing within number 10. And if you look at paragraph, hang on a second. Martin makes it clear that he thinks that the nature of the working environment in number 10 might make it difficult to claim that full social distancing was observed. So, forgive me, Chair.
Just suspend while the bell's ringing. We don't need to vote, but sorry, continue.
Okay, it's a very, very important point, because this goes to the heart of...
Very important
I
point.
think the confusion.
Your lies. Heart of your fucking lies. Your fucking lies. It's all you know.
To me,
it's all you know.
Martin is talking about
lies. Your
whether
lies.
or not we observed
your many
perfect
lies.
social distancing. He is
your
not
many fucking
saying
lies.
that we did not observe
all
the
you know how
guidance.
to do
And
is
I
to
can
lie.
Prove
and
that
deceive.
if you just reflect for a second
Fib.
on what it
all
would
you know
mean
how to
if
do.
he had said that throughout the pandemic we were not observing the guidance. He didn't mean that.
Did he not? No.
He and I were responsible for making sure that we were observing the guidance to the best of our ability. If you'd asked Simon Case or any of the senior officials, were we following the...
I know that he's lying.
The other way around. Were you
I can tell he's lying.
The guidance?
He's lying.
Number 10,
he's
they'd
lying.
have said no. We were following the guidance, but with mitigations and with social distancing where possible, as specified in the guidance.
Bullshit. Absolute
on
bullshit.
Reflection, and given that Mr. Reynolds says that you agreed to delete the reference to guidance, do you wish you'd have corrected the record at that point?
No, because
no, he doesn't care.
First of all,
it doesn't matter to him.
The inquiry.
Literally does not matter to him. He doesn't give a fuck.
What sense the guidance had been.
He doesn't give a fuck.
Broken. I didn't know. I had no evidence that anybody had broken the guidance. It wasn't clear to me what I would say to the House of Commons. Second, nobody was advising me to correct the record, and Martin and I, as I've tried to explain, we're talking about two different things.
Liar.
I was talking about.
What were you talking about?
The totality of following the guidance.
Big, massive fucking liar.
He was talking about maintaining perfect social distancing. The advice that he was giving me was in relation to a statement that I was making about the December the 18th event and about the reassurances I had received. And it was true to say that I'd received reassurances about that event as far as the rules went. But it was also true to say that nobody had explicitly reassured me about the guidance, and he thought it prudent to take out the reference to the guidance. It is true, as you just said, Mr. Carter, that I then went on to later in PMQs to talk
Assurances
to
implies
Catherine
they
West,
understand that you needed confirmation, so he cannot claim ignorance. I know he's tying himself in knots here. I hope they're all taking notes. I hope they're all looking at your comments coming up here. They're still in the DS10 situation where the committee is tasked with lying in Parliament.
13th, I said no, but I was sure that the rules and guidance had been observed. I said no, but whatever happened, I was sure that the rules and guidance had been observed at all times. And I said that with confidence.
Apologies to the
I knew about the events he was talking about on November the 13th and had my own personal reasons to believe.
Come lie with me, come lie, let's lie away. Let's tell some fibs and make reality just go away.
Social distancing was required by the guidance. If you believe this, why did you not make it clear when you told
you are
the House
posh,
that the
they
guidance
say.
was followed at all times?
Just lie with me, let's lie away.
Perhaps it would have been
prudent.
Perhaps it would have, as I think Sir Bernard said earlier on, perhaps if I'd elucidated more clearly what I meant.
Oh God, he's saying elucidated as well again.
Following the guidance.
What a shitty.
That would have helped.
What a fucknut. What a fucking
Paragraph
gobshite.
28 of your submission. You quote an excerpt from the workplace guidance which says, where the social distancing guidelines cannot be followed in full in relation to a particular activity, business should consider whether that activity needs to continue for the business to operate. And if so, take all the mitigating actions possible to reduce the risk of transmission. Are you saying you thought these gatherings were so critical to the function of government that it was permissible to hold them even if they couldn't be socially distanced?
The short answer is yes.
Yeah,
I thought
it was
that it was essential to thank staff for their
absolutely essential
work.
that I
think
had a party, several parties,
even though
lots of parties, 18
seem to
parties,
show,
all the parties,
events,
the parties that I got caught out
even
for,
in those pictures,
and the ones I didn't.
Being made to do social distancing, and what I saw, and what I had in my head when I was talking to the House of Commons was a memory, a strong memory of people over a long period doing everything they could to stop the spread of disease within the building.
Horrible
just so we're clear,
that's all you know how to do.
At those events in the vestibule, the first pictures we saw, what mitigations were put in place that were required by the guidance?
So
mitigations. He admitted there were no attempts at mitigation.
Some of them, but
he just believed that if you couldn't distance yourself, you should forget it.
Avoided physical contact. We didn't, for instance, as the guidance says,
people were having sex. People were having sex. People were having sex in the fucking cupboards, mate.
Avoid it. We kept. Though not every, I would not wish to say that was perfectly implemented.
Presumably, people were passing drinks to each other because we've seen the picture.
Of course, and I'm not.
Of course, they were passing drinks to each other.
This is guidance.
She just said that.
I'm not going to pretend.
He just said that out loud. He just said the quiet bit out loud.
It was.
Of course, we were passing stuff to each other
Rigidly, but that's explicitly what the guidance provides for. We had Zoom meetings. We had a great reduction in the numbers of people in the building overall. We had signs telling you which way to walk. We had perspex screens, and I've mentioned all this before, but it really is worth going over again because
is asking you about that specific event.
When you see the photographs,
the December the 18th event.
When you see the photographs in the vestibule, none of those mitigations seem to be evident.
Yes, because so which event are you talking about, Mr. Carter?
So the first photographs that we saw.
Yes, okay, the November the 30th, the Lee Kane event. Yes, and that is because that was the space where people congregated fast. If I wanted to get a message out, it was the natural place to do it. Yes, you don't see you don't see perspex screens there, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't sanitizer and efforts to restrict the spread of COVID.
Final question for me.
And just as just in all of this, bear in mind that we believed, Martin Reynolds believed, everybody responsible for the health of the building and the health of employees in the building believed that the guidance was being very considerably augmented in a way that went beyond the guidance by the testing regime that I've described.
I don't think any members of this committee don't recognise the challenges that you were facing, the team were facing in Downing Street, and the steps that were being put in place to try and keep people safe. I do, though, want to just finish, if I may, with the...
I'm just going to disappear for a moment.
I will return. On the 12th of January, that you believed implicitly that the gatherings of the 20th of May, which you attended, had been a work event. That was the event in the garden. I mean, it was termed in the press the Bring Your Own Booze. It was a garden party. Many are suggesting that was clearly not essential for work purposes and therefore in breach of the COVID rules at the time. Why did you say that to the House?
Because I implicitly believe that it was a work event, and as I said to the committee just now, I was ushered out into the garden, having been briefed shortly beforehand about what the event entailed. I met and thanked various groups of people who had been working on COVID. You see the numbers are calculated at between 10 and 30 or 40. I couldn't say exactly how many were there, but it was, I thought, an appropriate use of the garden. I felt it was an obvious work event. But what I said to Sue Gray afterwards, if we can mention Sue Gray, can we, Chair? What I said to Sue Gray was that when I looked back at that event, and this is why I said to the House. I tried to put myself in the place of somebody, a member of the public, looking over the garden wall and seeing that, and I had to accept that even though it was, I believe, within the guidance and within the rules, I have to accept that members of the public looking at it would have thought, that looks to me like something that he's not allowing us to do. And I felt that very keenly. In retrospect, I didn't feel it at the time. you see what I'm trying to say?
I understand that. Can I ask you one further question? I think probably all MPs that have been on days where we're very busy going from meeting to meeting rely on our advisors to guide us through where we're going. I understand what you said about that as the Prime Minister working on a busy schedule. Did you at any point question any of the events that you were going to when the advisors were taking you to them?
Look, hindsight's a wonderful thing. In retrospect, I might have thought about some things, post Sue Gray, post the beginning of the coming to light of everything that did come to light. I have thought about it, but no, at the time, I thought we were working. And that is what, I promise you, that is what officials in Number 10 thought they were doing as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson.
Can we now turn to the issue of the assurances that you mentioned to the House on numerous occasions? And I'd like to ask Alberto Costa to ask you the committee's questions on the issue of the assurances.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson. Thank you very much for coming before this important inquiry. I'm very grateful. Could I invite the team to place up slide number 8, please? Mr. Johnson, as we've just seen on the screen, on the 8th of December 2021, in your opening remarks at Prime Minister's questions, you told the House that, and I quote, "I've been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken." In response to subsequent questions, you said that, quote, "I've been repeatedly assured that the rules were not broken." And again, quote, "I've been repeatedly assured that no rules were broken." Now, these quotes which are on screen are also at pages 64 to 65 of your evidence bundle.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, may I ask, did any government law officer or any member of the government legal department, such as the Attorney General, Solicitor General, or any one of the hundreds of solicitors and barristers that work for the government, did any one of those give you assurance?
Hiya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Costa. Well, no, the short answer is no, they didn't, but nor did I seek assurances from them, nor did I claim that I had. I don't think I claimed at any stage that I'd received assurances from law officers or legal representatives. The people that I said, the people who had given me the assurances, that there were more than one, and it was indeed on more than one occasion. And so, would it be helpful if I told you why I said I was repeatedly assured?
Mr. Costa ask his questions and then just follow the course of his questioning, if you would.
Very interested to hear, of course, your full responses. Can I ask, did the head of the civil service, Simon Case, or any other career senior permanent civil servant give you these assurances?
Well, it follows from Martin Reynolds' evidence that he thought that the rules had not been broken.
Not been followed.
If you look at what he has to say, I don't remember being specifically assured by any senior civil servant about the rules or the guidance within Number 10. But the interesting thing is that, to the contrary, nobody gave me any contrary.
We'll come to that in a moment, if we may.
No one gave me any contrary advice.
In paragraph 90 of your very helpful written submission, you say that the assurances were given to you by Jack Doyle and James Slack.
That's right.
Their statements confirming this are on pages 70, 72 and 75 of your evidence bundle.
Yeah.
Now, they're both individuals you had personally appointed to the position of Director of Communications at Number 10.
Yes.
They were political advisors who dealt with the media. Why did you rely on an assurance from political advisors rather than, as I've mentioned, a permanent civil servant, or more importantly, a government lawyer?
So here's the simple answer is that when I needed to discover what had happened, whether the rules were broken, I went first, of course, or I asked first the senior advisor who was there, and that was Jack Doyle. The following week, you can see that Jack Doyle says that he confirms that he says in a WhatsApp to me, you can say, I've been assured that there was no party and no rules were broken. So he says that again to me. I also then rang James Slack, and both Jack and James Slack are people I have the utmost regard for, and I believe they would be completely straight with me about what had happened, and they both said that the rules had not been broken. And the reason I didn't ask a lawyer or another senior civil servant is because they were the people who'd been there. And they were the direct, they could give a view about the legality of that event that I didn't think a non-eyewitness would be able to do.
We're watching a man saying the first thing comes to mind to get it for the next 10
seconds. That you referred to in the House. Why did you not then discuss the assurance with the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, or your Principal Private Secretary Martin Reynolds, or a government lawyer, at the point at which you've been given the assurance by the individuals that you've questioned? Why didn't you double check it with a government lawyer?
First of all, Martin Reynolds, in addition to being my Principal Private Secretary, is a lawyer, and his view of all the events, as you'll see from his evidence, is that he believes that we followed the rules at all times, and that was certainly what he said to me. You'll see evidence, Mr. Costa, from my submission that at least a couple of MP colleagues remember from the morning meeting that I asked generally, did we follow the rules, were there parties, and the view of the assembled civil servants and advisors was that we hadn't broken the rules, and that's what they said.
The MPs that you're referring to are the ones at paragraph 90 of your written submission, where you state that the evidence given to us by Sarah Dines MP and Andrew Griffith MP saying officials gave you assurances at your daily office meetings.
No, David.
Those are the additional assurances that you're referring to.
Yes, and it's not clear what date that Sarah and Andrew remember, but they certainly remember me receiving those assurances. And don't forget, if I could just make an important point, from the 7th from the 7th of December onwards, the inquiry is underway. So you ask why I didn't ask Simon Case. I did ask Simon Case. I asked Simon Case to conduct an inquiry.
Well, I'm very grateful that you recall Sarah Dines MP and Andrew Griffith MP giving you the assurances, but you were present at those meetings where those two MPs said that assurances had been given. So if I just may ask the question, and you can correct me if I misunderstood the point, who were the officials who gave these assurances in this meetings that you've referred to at paragraph 90 in your written submissions?
Well, I can't name these officials.
Name me one.
I don't know if I can. I think that.
Why not?
I think that most of them have indicated they don't want themselves to be
you can't remember their names, or because
named.
you don't want to breach their anonymity. Mr. Johnson, could you just pause and answer my question? Are you not naming these officials who you say were giving you these assurances because you can't remember who they were, or you can't remember their names, or because you don't want to name them because of confidentiality?
There's at least one advisor that I can think of that who was asked not to be named, and she would have been in the morning.
He's squaring now. It's getting good.
I don't want to.
Well, could you follow that up in writing through your lawyers to the inquiry, confirming the name of the individual that you recall gave you the assurance that the meetings referred to by these two?
But if I may say so, Mr. Costa, I don't quite follow the direction of your questions, because it's clear from what I've said that I was assured repeatedly by different people and on different occasions that the rules have been followed.
And we're trying to ascertain who these individuals were, so it'd be very helpful if you could follow up with the individual that you've just referred to. Now, could I ask the team to place slide 9 on the screens, please. Now, slide 9 refers to a comment made by Mr. Doyle, and that will also be found at page 74 of the bundle. Mr. Doyle is asked a question. Was there a discussion in this meeting, the meeting of the 8th of December 2021, whether COVID guidance was adhered to at all times? And Mr. Doyle states, quote, "I did not advise the Prime Minister to say this, no." So Mr. Doyle says he did not discuss with you whether any gatherings had been compliant with COVID guidance. Is it correct that you received no assurances that the gathering of 18th December 2020 or any other gatherings were compliant with COVID guidance?
Yes,
as opposed to the rules?
It's correct to say that I did not, as far as I can remember. I didn't receive direct assurances about the December the 18th event, about the guidance. But until Martin Reynolds made his point to me on the morning of the 8th, nobody had said to me anything adverse about our following of the guidance. And it was my impression from what we were doing, from my lived experience in Number 10, that we were.
I'd like to ascertain about assurances that you've been given. So
I'm giving you the answer.
So let me carry on, if I may, Mr. Johnson. Can I ask you to turn to pages 70 and 73 of your evidence bundle, and you'll see excerpts from Mr. Doyle's signed witness submission. Now, Mr. Doyle says, and I quote, "The lines that were drafted for the Mirror," that's the Daily Mirror, "it became the basis of Mr. Johnson's lines to take in Prime Minister's questions on the 1st of December 2021, end quote. He also says, in relation to a conversation he had with you on the 30th of November, quote, "I said that we have had an inquiry from the Daily Mirror." He said, "What is our line?" End quote. Page 76 of your evidence bundle shows the line sent to the Mirror was, quote, "COVID rules were followed at all times."
Oh, really?
End quote. So that line, Mr. Johnson, the assurance that you relied on in the House of Commons on the 8th of December was initially developed as no more than a media line to hold at bay press inquiries, wasn't it?
Yes, but I don't see any great vice in that. And I think we have to be absolutely realistic about how government is carried on. And if a minister cannot rely on the advice of senior and trusted officials when you have to get a huge amount of business done, then it would be impossible for government to carry on.
Could I ask you to, you've acknowledged that it was developed as a media line to hold at bay the press inquiries. So I think we need to hear from Mr. Costa his next question.
Thank you, Chair. It is the case, isn't it, that Jack Doyle, the person whose purported assurance you sought to rely on, was himself doubtful about the compliance of some of these gatherings with the rules and guidance. Now, Mr. Johnson...
Sorry, I don't know whence do you derive that?
I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you. If you turn to page 79 of your evidence bundle...
Saying he said this at the time.
If you turn to page 79 of your evidence bundle, you will see a selection of WhatsApp messages sent by Mr. Doyle. These messages are discussing the gathering of the 19th of June 2020 that marked your birthday. Mr. Doyle says that he was, and I quote, struggling to come up with a way that the gathering was in the rules and that he was, quote, not sure it would, quote, work to suggest it was reasonably necessary for work purposes. Were you aware, Mr. Johnson, that your trusted senior advisor, as you've put it, Mr. Doyle, doubted whether this gathering was within the rules?
So, no is the answer to that question. I wasn't aware that he'd sent that WhatsApp. He didn't send it to me. This was, I think, on January the 25th, which is long after we've started the process which was to become the Sue Gray. I think the Sue Gray inquiry was already well underway. A couple of other quick points, if I may, on that WhatsApp. Jack was not at that event on the 19th of June 2020. He knew nothing about what had actually taken place. He was then relying on media descriptions of that event, which had subsequently emerged. And yes, he sent a message to someone else saying he needed to work out what the justification was. But just to go back to the June the 19th event, 2020, which we've been over several times, at the time I thought it was so innocent that it was actually briefed out to the Times.
I appreciate that, but I'm talking about assurances you were given, so let me focus again. So how can it be that Mr. Doyle, and this is the point I think is important for the inquiry to understand, how can it be that Mr. Doyle, one of your principal advisors, your trusted advisor, the person whose assurance you relied on in the House of Commons, was himself clearly doubtful about the compliance of this gathering with the rules, but you continue to say that you were not? How can that be?
He wasn't at that event. He was struggling to contend with media accounts of it long after that event and after the Sue Gray inquiry had already begun. And above all, he did not, even at that time, let alone before I stood up in the House of Commons, raise with me any concerns that he might have had about that event.
Thank you.
Even if he knew about it.
I'm almost finished, Mr. Johnson. Why did you tell the House of Commons that you had received repeated assurances that no rules had been broken when you knew that that was not the case, because you knew what the rules were? You were at gatherings that breached the rules, and the breaches of the rules would have been obvious to you at the time. Isn't that the case?
No,
Let me complete the question, if you may.
Some might see your reliance on the purported assurances you received as, and forgive me, as a deflection mechanism to prevent having to answer questions about your knowledge of these gatherings. Would that not be a fair assessment?
No, it would be a completely ridiculous assessment. I said in the Commons on the 8th of December that I'd been repeatedly assured that there was no party and that no rules were broken. I was referring to the December the 20th.
Oh, he's referring to one of the parties
event, December the 18th event of the previous year of 2020. I had the assurances that I had received about that event were from people that I had the utmost respect for and who were directly relevant to my understanding of what that event consisted of. It was entirely sensible to talk both to Jack and then Jack Doyle and then to James Slack to find out, to get their honest take about what had happened. And my impression on the 30th of November 2020 from what Jack was telling me was that it sounded like it was in accordance with the rules. It sounded like it was necessary for work purposes.
Michael Mouse,
but also it sounded from what he was saying that it was in accordance with the guidance. When that turned out, following the Allegra video to be in question, I commissioned Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, to conduct an inquiry. So by the time and if you look at that statement, I say I've been repeatedly assured that there was no party and that the rules were followed, but I have asked Simon Case to investigate. So for the purposes of the House, my statement is to be seen for the purposes of the business.
He's lying. He's lying. How do you know he's lying? Because his mouth is moving.
Inquiry that I have just launched, in which in the same PMQs I say I'm going to make sure that the findings are placed in the Library of the House of Commons.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for answering my questions this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Could I just put a point to you? Because I, along with my colleagues, was in the House at the time when these assurances were given. And we took them to be serious assurances. You told the House you'd received assurances. Would you not expect us to be a bit dismayed to hear that it was not from the senior civil servants, it was from political appointees, that they themselves had doubts about it? It only covered one gathering, it didn't cover the other three, and it only covered the rules, it didn't cover the guidance. I think if you'd have said that to us in the House, and also you were there at the time, so it's a bit hard to understand. Could you let me finish my point?
Yeah,
you were there at the
Boris.
time, so it's a bit hard to understand what the nature of an assurance is when you have been there and seen it with your own eyes. I mean, if I was going at 100 miles an hour and I saw the speedometer saying 100 miles an hour, it would be a bit odd, wouldn't it, if I said somebody assured me that I wasn't, because it's what you've seen with your own eyes.
Yeah, with great respect.
Do you actually think that we would be entitled to be a bit dismayed about the flimsy nature of this assurance when we took it at face value that these assurances amounted to something, and it looks from what you've told us in answer to Mr. Costa's questions that they did not amount to much at all?
No, so first of all, I think, with great respect, Chair, if you're talking about the December the 18th, 2020 event, I don't know, there's some confusion. I was not there.
That's one of the three.
I was not there.
You were there.
And if you look at the statement that I made in the House of Commons, and because this was the relevant issue, because the Allegra video related to the December the 18th event, the Leader of the Opposition's questions the previous week related to the December the 18th event, I was answering about the December the 18th event, because that was the matter in question. I had received, as I said, repeated assurances by different people at more than one occasion and more than one person that the event was in accordance with the rules. And I had that both from, as I said, Jack Doyle and James Slack. Now, the question that I think the committee is trying to unpick is that a good enough assurance? Is it good enough to rely on the Director of Communications and the former Director of Communications about one event, no matter how eminent they may be? And I think the answer is yes.
He himself had doubts.
I think, no, sorry, forgive me. He offered, that's not correct, Chair. The Director of Communications, Jack Doyle, did not say at the time that he briefed me about the December the 18th event that he had doubts about whether the guidance was followed.
He did have doubts. Can I just ask...
Sorry. Where's your evidence for that?
It's in the WhatsApp. Sir Bernard is going to continue this question.
Sorry, can I just say, he did not express those doubts to me. He did not express those doubts to me.
He had doubts. The person whose assurances you were relying on only gave assurances in relation to one gathering, not the others. Only gave assurances of the rules, not about COVID. It was relying...
Chair, I was being asked about the one gathering. The Leader of the Opposition, you played his clip just now. That was, everybody saw it. He was asking about, he said, was there a party in which loads of people came to a Christmas party in Downing Street last year? That was the question. That was then, when I said that the guidance was followed completely at all times, that was then called into question by what Allegra Stratton had to say. So we immediately instituted the inquiry by Simon Case, but that remained the point at issue. The point at issue was what had happened on December the 18th. And really, if the committee is going to say that I can't rely on the advice of senior people like Jack Doyle and James Slack, who had the advantage of actually being there, then it's really going to make it very difficult for government to be carried on.
Mr. Johnson, just 2 points arising from, when you're ready, 2 points arising from the recent questions and answers. First of all, on the question of Sarah Dine's statement of evidence, where she mentions that either on the 1st of December or the 8th of December, she recalls are you asking? We did follow the rules at all times, didn't we? And this is in your paragraph 90 of your submission. And I recall more than one person in the room said, yes, of course. And she says, I'm not certain who the people were, but I quote, I'm 90% sure one of them was Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary. The difficulty we have with that evidence is in the sworn statement from Simon Case, which I'm afraid is not in the call bundle, but it's on page 33. It's on 791 and 792 of the general bundle, and don't waste time fumbling for it because I will explain. He's asked about both these meetings, and he makes it clear that there was was there discussion in the meeting of the following points, and if so, what were the details of that discussion? He says, I do not believe any of these topics were discussed at the meeting. And he's asked a general question on 793, are you aware of any other meeting where Mr. Johnson was present where the points listed in parts E and F were discussed, and that's whether there was any discussion about compliance with the guidance and rules? And he says no. So we have a difficulty giving any credibility to the evidence we've received from Sarah Dines, albeit I'm sure she gave that evidence in good faith. Then there's the question of your reliance on... I mean, have you got anything to say about that? I should give you the opportunity.
Well, I think if you're going to question her evidence, then you need to hear it from her. I can't comment on her. I can't comment on her evidence. I can't comment on what Simon Case has said. What I do remember are general affirmation from colleagues that it was the line I was about to use in PMQs that about the rules being followed was supported.
But do you remember Simon Case saying?
Frankly,
yes,
I don't. But it's,
I'm not questioning.
But you should ask him.
I'm not questioning the veracity.
We're asking you because you were there.
I'm not questioning the veracity of her statement as she believes it, because she is quite open. She says she's only 90% sure. She's not sure.
I wasn't relying for what I said on the Cabinet Secretary.
If you think it's terribly important that we interrogate Sarah Dines, we will consider.
No, I don't think. I don't. I think it's probably totally irrelevant. I think that the key point is that when I said that I'd had repeated assurances, I was not. I never claimed that I had one of those people giving me those assurances was Simon Case.
Okay, but there's another more general point. You say, I see no great vice in that. That is relying on the assurance of Mr. Doyle, who was an appointed political advisor, not a professional civil servant, not an impartial...
Like Sue Gray.
Well, we're not relying on Sue Gray's evidence in this inquiry. The obligation not to mislead Parliament is a very serious obligation on any member of Parliament, let alone a minister. And it requires the MP or the minister to take due care, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes. So I have to say, if I was accused of law breaking and I had to give undertakings to the House of Commons, of all places, that I had not broken the law, I would want the advice of a lawyer. I would want the advice of somebody really independent and capable, and you didn't ask the Cabinet Secretary.
Can I interrupt you for 10 seconds?
Yes?
I wasn't accused of law breaking. I was asked to say what had gone on at a party or an event
but if I was asked to give
in the media room on the 18th of December 2020.
If I was asked to give undertakings that rules and guidance had been followed, and there was any doubt about it, there was the most thinnest scintilla of doubt about it, well, you'd want to copper plate your assurances by showing that you'd taken proper advice.
Perhaps
and I put it to you, Mr. Johnson, you did not take proper advice.
Can I respond first by saying that if you look at what I said on December the 1st, you have to. It is true, as Mr. Carter said, that I had expected something like that question to come up, but actually, I thought that the leader of the opposition would not bother with that story for his main line of
that's
presence.
irrelevant.
It is relevant.
The question is, why did you not take proper advice?
Sorry. The answer is quite simply that over the I've tried to describe what I felt about these events as they were happening. Nobody raised with me or had any concern before I stood up on December the 1st about those events.
You did not ask.
I asked. I did say this is complete nonsense. I mean, complete nonsense. I asked the relevant people. They were senior people. They've been working very hard. They gave Jack Doyle gave me a clear account of what had happened.
The Cabinet Secretary.
How the Cabinet Secretary wasn't there? Sorry, you're wrong, because I did ask the Cabinet Secretary. I did ask the Cabinet Secretary to conduct an inquiry on the 7th of December.
Not about whether your undertakings to the House of Commons were correct.
But of course that was what he was...
We can move on.
Can we turn to Charles Walker for our next questions?
Sorry, there's some noises coming from the back of the room. Is that stopped? Okay. Mr. Johnson, housekeeping matters. You're a parliamentarian, I'm a parliamentarian, so we do have a duty to Parliament. There's been a lot of noises of hue and cry about the legitimacy of this inquiry, which I do think we need to address. You sort of alluded to it in your opening statement. I'll just give you an example of an organisation that claims to have your interests at heart. It's called Conservative Post. In a recent article published on its website on the 12th of March, it stated, this was the headline, revealed the Privileges Committee's Great British Stitch-Up of Boris. And the sentences, so when Labour proposed referring Boris Johnson to the Privileges Committee for misleading Parliament, many Conservative MPs didn't oppose it. Now, I just want to park that for a second and take you back about 11 months before that. On the 21st of April, when your case was referred to the Privileges Committee, the government minister, the Right Honourable Michael Ellis QC, the then Minister for the Cabinet Office and Paymaster General, said the following in winding up. The government recognised the seriousness of the issue under consideration. Let me say at the outset that the Prime Minister has always been clear that he is happy to face whatever inquiries Parliament sees fit to hold. He is happy for the House to decide how it wishes to proceed today. And this is important because at the end of that, the motion was put and there was no vote. And that is a matter of fact. Indeed, there wasn't even a cry of object from anyone. Can you accept that was the case?
Yes, I encourage people to support it.
So it is actually misleading of Conservative Post to say many Conservative MPs didn't oppose it. The truth is not a single Conservative MP opposed it.
Yes, that's completely correct.
That's great. No, this is really good. This is good. We're making progress. In your opening statement, you referred to the chair, the appointment of the chair. You suggest to some extent that you had concerns, but you were willing to set those concerns aside. On the 14th of June 2022, the Right Honourable Lady for Camberwell and Peckham, there was a motion to add her to the committee on the 14th of June 2022. And it went through at the end of a debate on the privatisation of Channel 4, and there were colleagues of ours in the chamber. And when the motion was put and the Right Honourable Lady's name was mentioned, there was not a single cry of object, not one, not even from a little mouse scuttling across the floor, not a single cry of object on the 14th of June. Can you accept that as well?
Of course.
So if these concerns were live about the committee and our legitimacy or the legitimacy of the chair, somebody might have shouted object.
I've listened. Okay. So Charles, can I just come back quickly on this point? My anxieties about fairness are contained in my submission. I've said what I've had to say about the previous remarks of the chair. And I've said what I had to say about my belief in the ability of this committee, which is a very important and distinguished committee, to be impartial.
Which were made before her appointment on the 14th.
And I have come before you this afternoon in full confidence that you will be impartial and that you will look at the evidence and that you will conclude that I did not wittingly or recklessly mislead Parliament. There's not a shred of evidence to suggest that I did, and I hope that you will exonerate me, and I think you should exonerate me of any contempt whatever.
So look, we received your evidence bundle, which was really well put together. It's been a long afternoon. We've shared the talking. You've had to do it on your own. So thank you for answering our questions. But it is a well put together bundle. I just feel that the way things have been conducted is that your supporters, I'm not saying you, I'm saying your supporters seem to want it both ways. They're hoping that the evidence you've given in 52 pages will exonerate you, give you a clean bill of health. That's what your desired outcome is. But just in case that doesn't happen, there has been a concerted effort to delegitimise the committee, to call us a kangaroo court. Have you characterised us as a kangaroo court?
You can tell by my presence this afternoon, by the seriousness with which I've taken your questions, by my attempts to answer in detail the points you've put to me, how seriously I take you and your committee, the respect I have for this institution of Parliament, and for better or worse, whatever the issues of fairness that I may have raised in my submission, this is the body that decides on standards and privileges. This is the committee that does it. There's no other way of doing it. That's why I have come here, out of respect for the committee, out of respect for Parliament, and because I do not believe that you can conceivably find me guilty of wittingly misleading Parliament on the basis of the evidence that you have assembled.
So as a parliamentarian, do you regret that colleagues of ours, who are also parliamentarians, have called the Privileges Committee a kangaroo court?
I don't want anybody to cause any colleague there should be no intimidation or there should be no attempt to bully any colleague in any matter whatever.
Or is that a yes or a no?
Yes.
But you regret that they...
Sorry, I'm not...
Because I regret it.
I'm not.
As a parliamentarian, do you regret it?
My questions of fairness are well documented in my submission. I think that I deprecate the term that you've just used. I don't want to repeat it. But I think the people will judge for themselves on the basis of the evidence that you have produced on the fairness of this committee. I have every confidence that you will show that you can be fair.
Okay, I'm nearly done.
Can I just interject, if I may, Chair? Will you accept that this committee can be fair and wrong, rather than being unfair and a witch hunt?
I certainly think that, let me put it this way, Mr. Costa, I think if this committee were to find me in contempt of Parliament, having come and done something so utterly insane and contrary to my beliefs and my principles, is to come to Parliament and wittingly lie, I think that would be not only unfair, I think it would be wrong.
But indeed, but you wouldn't categorise it as a witch hunt or a kangaroo court. That's the point I'm asking.
I think you
doesn't exonerate.
I will wait to see how you proceed with the evidence that you have. But I do not wish to. I will study your conclusions from the evidence. I deprecate the terms that you have used. I don't want to see good colleagues feeling that they're under pressure either way. I believe that if you study this evidence impartially, you will come to the conclusion that I've given.
Nearly done. On the 25th of May, you described number 10, and here are the speech marks, a building that is 5,300 metres square across 5 floors, excluding the flats. Hundreds of staff are entitled to work there. I'm really sorry. I think this is probably the last time you're going to be taken back to these dates. On the 1st of December, you will be well aware that you said to the Leader of the Opposition all guidance was followed completely in number 10. On the 8th of December, Again, to the Leader of the Opposition, you said, I have been repeatedly assured that the rules were not broken, and then I'll rattle through this quickly. On the 8th of December to Catherine West, regarding 13th of November alleged party, I'm sure whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times. You received assurances from a number of people. I suppose the question I've got is how on earth would they have known that the rules were being followed at all times? It is impossible because you didn't have cameras in every room.
No.
I mean,
but I had their pairs of eyes.
Yeah.
So you're right. So I didn't have omniscience about what was going on in the building, and I had to rely on what people told me. You're completely right, Sir Charles. But what they had to say was extremely valuable, and they were extremely reputable people, and are extremely reputable people. And they gave a description of that event, and to get back to the point that the chair was raising, initially it was one event that was under consideration, under discussion, and I took my cue from them.
So I want to say this because you worked incredibly hard. I accept you worked incredibly hard. I accept your officials worked incredibly hard. I accept that you were hospitalised. We got the vaccines out. You worked incredibly hard. I suppose what I'm left with, and I'm not sure if this helps or hinders your case, is when you look at 126 fixed penalty notices handed out to number 10, it is clear that Simon Case, Martin Reynolds, Jack Doyle, Lee Kane, James Slack, all of them really had no idea what was going on, because if they had, it is highly unlikely 126 fixed penalty notices would have been handed out.
And can I just say, Sir Charles, that you put your finger on the crucial point, because if the committee thinks that I must have known, or to get back to the conversation we've had, the doctrine of obviousness, if it was obvious to me, then it would have been obvious to those other senior and distinguished people. And it really wasn't. And I was very shocked to get my own FPN and amazed, frankly, by the number of other FPNs. Clearly what happened, if we don't want to go over it again, we don't want to reinvestigate, but I think what happened basically was that on a few evenings, events did simply go on far too long. And I can't apologise for that enough, but we are where we are.
I don't want to try your patience, because you have been here a long time. If not deliberate, is it possible that it was reckless or slightly reckless not to have caveated your statements to the House with, to the best of my knowledge, or I really do hope it was the certainty of the statements. And is it possible to accept that actually there was a degree of recklessness?
No, I mean nobody wants to be in a position where they're misleading the House. Nobody wants to say something to the House of Commons that is going to turn out not to be true, especially something as readily falsifiable as the guidance was followed completely. It was my belief that was the case. I have apologised, and I continue to apologise for inadvertently misleading the House, and I hope the committee understands that. But it was not deliberate. It was based on my genuine understanding and belief about what we were doing, what we had been doing for a long time. And I think that your point just now was one of the most important ones in this whole business. It wasn't obvious to me that there were problems with some events, and it wasn't obvious to the other senior people that you've described.
Thank you. I just want to finally explore the question of the correcting the record issue, because there's been a lot of discussion about you having corrected the record, and I just want to explore one aspect of that and put this to you. What you said on the 25th of May 2022, you said, "I'm happy to set on the record now that when I came to this House and said in all sincerity that the rules and guidance had been followed at all times, it was what I believed to be true." And you've said that to us this afternoon. You then go on to say, It was certainly the case that when I was present at gatherings to wish staff farewell. So what you said to the House, by way of a purported correction, was that it was certainly the case when you were present at gatherings to wish staff farewell that the guidance had been followed at all times. Do you want to reassert that, or do you want to correct the record and acknowledge here that actually the guidance was not followed at all times, just so we're clear, because you can correct the record to this committee.
So what I want to say is, first of all, that the rules were followed, and that's for my period at those events, and that's clear from the FPN.
Certainly the case,
and it was my belief at the time that I made those statements that the guidance was followed, and actually, Chair, it remains my belief. For the time I was there, when I was looking at these events, I thought they were within the guidance, given what I knew about what we were trying to do, given what I knew about the limitations we faced on maintaining perfect social distancing.
Now about what your belief is now.
So what I don't wish to dissent from what I said on May the 25th.
Well, May the 25th was 5 months after this had first been raised, and you'd had time to consider all the issues that were being raised, and even further time has elapsed till here we are now, and there's a lot of evidence that's been produced and you've had the opportunity to consider. Do you still want to assert that it was certainly the case when you were present at gatherings to wish staff farewell that the guidance had been followed at all times? Do you want to assert
I do.
To this committee?
I do, and what I want to make, I do, and because I see no reason to withdraw what I said on May the 25th, because at that stage on May the 25th I was in possession of, and I think the committee in possibly the world was in possession of all the material that we've looked at today. My view remains that the guidance allowed for social distancing not to be carried out with rigid drill sergeant precision, particularly in difficult circumstances such as the ones in which we were operating, provided you had mitigations.
Okay,
and so that was my belief, and it remains.
You're sticking with that point, and you don't wish to make a correction of the record. Thank you. That concludes our questions. Are there any final points that you haven't already mentioned? Not ones that you have mentioned, but ones which you would like to mention which haven't come up in our questions. We'd like to give you the opportunity to make those points.
Thank you very much. I've much enjoyed our discussion. Well, I think it's been I genuinely think it's been a useful discussion, and I hope it's clear to the committee what was in my heart and my mind on December the 1st and December the 8th of 2021.
And May the 25th and numerous other occasions.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. The committee will consider the evidence you've given us alongside the other evidence we've reviewed in the course of our inquiries. We may take further written and or oral evidence before the end of our inquiry and before we reach our final conclusions, if we deem that necessary, and we've already discussed the possibility of that. But for now, that concludes our session today. Order, order.
Thank you.
So there we are, hours of evidence from the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson to the Privileges Committee of the House of Commons, and we can get some reaction then to what he's been talking about there and his defence and his insistence that he did not mislead the Commons, did not lie to the Commons when he said that gatherings in the Downing Street during lockdown hadn't broken COVID rules and guidance. Let's just run you through some of the key points. The former Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson, denied lying to Parliament in that testimony to the committee. That will, of course, determine whether or not he did deliberately mislead MPs about attending parties. He said under oath that statements he had made in the Commons on the issue were based on what he honestly believed at the time. Mr. Johnson was subsequently fined, you may remember, by police for breaking his own rules on that his own government had put in place. He's acknowledged he misled Parliament, but he said that was inadvertent. He was not deliberately misleading Parliament, and he again apologised for that. Now, if the committee does find that he recklessly or intentionally misled Parliament, then it could recommend sanctions. He could be temporarily suspended from the House of Commons. At times, he sounded quite irritated with the questions he was getting, but at the end then, he said it had been a useful exercise. Let's have a listen to his opening statement to the Privileges Committee earlier on this afternoon.
There were a number of days over a period of 20 months when gatherings took place in Downing Street that went past the point where they could be said to be necessary for work purposes. That was wrong. I bitterly regret it. I understand public anger, and I continue to apologise for what happened on my watch, and I take full responsibility. But as you've just said, Chair, the purpose of this inquiry is not to reopen so-called Partygate. It is to discover whether or not I lied to Parliament, wittingly misled colleagues and the country about what I knew and believed about those gatherings when I said that the rules and the guidance had been followed at number 10. I am here to say to you, hand on heart, that I did not lie to the House. When those statements were made, they were made in good faith and on the basis of what I honestly knew and believed at the time. When this inquiry was set up, I was completely confident that you would find nothing to show I knew or believed anything else, as indeed you have not. I was confident, not because there's been some kind of cover-up, I was confident because I knew that is what I believed, and that is why I said it. To understand why I believed it, you have to go back to a time before the Sue Gray report, before the police investigation, back to a time where, as the evidence before the committee shows, there was a near universal belief at number 10 that the rules and guidance were being complied with. That is the general belief that has been uncovered by your evidence, and it was that belief that governed what I said in the House. And as soon as it was clear that I was wrong, and as soon as the Sue Gray investigation and the Metropolitan Police investigation had concluded, I came to the House of Commons and I corrected the record as I promised I would.
So that was Mr. Johnson at the start of those hearings, and throughout the afternoon, in fact, he struck a pretty defiant tone. He stressed that he did not recklessly mislead the House of Commons.
The committee criticises the manner in which I corrected the record. I corrected the record on the day of Sue Gray's final report and 6 days after the completion of the police investigation. If the committee's view is that I should have come to the House and provided an inevitably incomplete account while a government or a police investigation was going on, including into events I hadn't even attended, I fundamentally disagree. At all times, I was entirely transparent with the House. I made it clear that I did not intend to comment on any of the factual matters until the investigation had been concluded. I kept the House regularly updated, and as soon as the investigations were complete, I provided a full correction of my honest but inadvertently misleading statements. I apologise. I apologise for inadvertently misleading this House, but to say that I did it recklessly or deliberately is completely untrue, as the evidence shows.
So another excerpt of Mr. Johnson's testimony there. Let's talk to our political correspondent, Leila Nathu, who's at Westminster for us. Well, what did you make of Mr. Johnson's testimony in the hearings? At times he sounded pretty irritated with the whole procedure.
Yeah, I think as time went on, Boris Johnson's frustrations certainly grew with the lines of questioning. You know, he used words like it would be utterly insane to think that he deliberately lied when he made those statements to Parliament. You know, I think at the beginning it started off quite measured, and then certainly after repeated questioning, it was more than 3 hours in that committee session with just a little break for the vote. So a lot to digest. You know, I think useful to just recap on his main points that he made in his defence. He talked a lot about the building of Number 10, the kind of circumstances under which they were working, that it was very difficult at all times to follow social distancing rules. He talked a lot about the other mitigations that were put in place, testing, perspex screens, that sort of thing, Zoom meetings, as evidence to say, look, they were taking things seriously, and it wasn't the case that there was no regard for rules and guidelines in Number 10 at the time. He was questioned about various leaving dues where there had been sort of impromptu celebrations for people who had left the team in Number 10, some of which he was present at. And he started talking about the fact that that was a necessary thing to do because he wants to boost morale, to say a few words at the leaving dues that he attended. So that was quite an interesting angle that he took, that he was trying to frame those events as necessary for work purposes. He was then questioned quite a lot about the assurances that he had received at various events that were being exposed in the press at the time were within the guidelines, and he was pressed quite a lot about why he relied on political advisors for those assurances and whether those assurances related to all the events or just one particular event, and that is where I think the exchanges got most heated. And then, you know, at the beginning of his opening statement, he certainly pointed the finger at the committee itself and the structure and the remit of the committee, talking about his fears that the committee had already jumped to conclusions even before it had taken all the evidence, the fact that they were straying into territory that they shouldn't, according to the remit. So I think a lot to digest, but I think certainly the impression I'm left with is that Boris Johnson was really trying to put up a fight to defend himself, to hang on to all of those very detailed points. He tried to say to the committee that he was taking their questioning seriously, that he was saying, look, I don't regard this as a kangaroo court, as one of his supporters had labelled the committee, and that he was trying to give very detailed response to each and every question. But remember, he was speaking very carefully because at the beginning of the session, he took an oath. So if he says, if anything that he has said in this session is found out not to be true, he could be at risk of having perjured himself.
And fighting hard, as you say, because the stakes here are pretty high for him politically. This is a man who still has political ambitions, perhaps indeed to return to Number 10 Downing Street. But the consequences, if this goes badly for him, could be politically pretty dire.
Yeah, I think it's really worth reflecting on the bigger picture because, you know, to some extent, this is a committee hearing. We're very used to covering committee hearings here in Parliament, and a lot of the essence of this was about parliamentary procedure. The main question the committee is seeking to answer is whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament, and if he did so, he has admitted that. Did he do so deliberately? And actually, was he in contempt of Parliament? It's quite a technical term, really, if you think about it at its core. But as you say, the consequences of the committee's decision are crucial for Boris Johnson's future. This is the final chapter, if you like, in the Partygate inquiries. We've obviously had the Metropolitan Police's own investigation into it. Then there was the Sue Gray, the senior civil servant at the time, her report that detailed all of the events that had taken place. And this is now a sort of parliamentary angle to the whole episode. But really, this is now the sort of final chance for Boris Johnson to make his case, to try and convince the committee, MPs, Parliament and the public that he was not lying to Parliament, that he can still be trusted, because all of those questions about trust and lies were central to Boris Johnson's downfall. And I think it was very significant today that he was in Parliament for hours, just as there was another separate vote on something that he is intimately connected with, Brexit. Of course, he was one of the rebels against Rishi Sunak's deal for post-Brexit trading arrangements for Northern Ireland. So a very significant day for Boris Johnson, and certainly the sense that he is fighting for his political career.
OK, Layla, thank you very much. And in the studio with me, we've got our political correspondent, Rob Watson, and also Dr. Alice Lilly, senior researcher at the Institute for Government, a non-partisan think tank. Rob, first of all, let's just pick up on what Layla was saying. This is a man fighting for his political life.
He is, although I totally agree with everything Layla said and how she set it out. But, you know, I think there's a chance that actually his testimony, long and involved as it was, will absolutely change nothing in terms of public opinion. What do I mean by that? The polling suggests that those people who think this is a fuss about nothing and that he did a difficult job in difficult circumstances as well as he could, I don't think any of this will have changed their minds. And those who think, hang on a minute, there was clearly one rule for the rulers and another one for the ruled. How on earth could they be having these functions? How on earth could he think this was a work event when everybody else was, you know, keeping two meters distances? I don't think they will have changed their minds, but they're not the ones who matter, of course. It's this committee. It's this committee of 7 MPs who will have to reach a judgment as to whether they've been, whether Parliament was intentionally misled or not. I mean, what they're going to come up with, I don't know. Layla, I think, highlighted the bits that they were concerned about, the extent to which he relied on his media advisors, political advisors, rather than sort of broader reassurances. But it seems to me that's where it is. I just don't think public opinion is going to change very much, both in a sort of positive and negative way for Boris Johnson. There will no doubt continue to be a significant minority of the people in this country who tend to take the view, if you mention Boris Johnson, good old Boris, and a significant majority who think he shouldn't come back to power or anywhere near it.
And Alice, how high is the bar for this committee to be absolutely certain that he did knowingly, intentionally mislead the House of Commons?
For the committee, there's a few things that they need to be thinking about. So the first thing is whether Johnson misled Parliament, and if so, was that intentional? Was it inadvertent? Was it reckless? And when they're thinking about those things, that will shape their ultimate view of the ultimate judgment they need to come up with, which is, did Johnson commit a contempt of Parliament? In other words, did he act in a way that prevented or made it difficult for Parliament to actually do its job? And so sort of the questions of exactly what he said, when he said it, whether it was misleading, and the severity of that will be all of the things that they will be sort of wrapping up when they come to that judgment. It is worth saying, though, that whatever judgment the committee reaches, if it does reach a judgment where it says that there should be some kind of sanction against Johnson, it is not up to the committee to make that happen. Any sanction recommended by the committee would have to be approved by the House of Commons as a whole. And so the Privileges Committee, yes, we've spent hours watching it. What it says will clearly be absolutely crucial, but it is not the only actor that is involved in this inquiry.
And Rob, just in terms of his defence, and he'd obviously spent a lot of time preparing this defence, it was quite detailed, it was quite impassioned, wasn't it? And at times he was quite exasperated with the whole process, he felt.
It was impassioned, and actually you can just sum up his defence in 2 points, and he kept coming back to it and back to it and back to it. The first one being that, look, you know, the idea that we were sort of couldn't care less about the guidelines is rubbish. I mean, were we successful at the social distancing all the time? Absolutely not. Clearly, it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't party time. And that was the point he was trying to make, and he came back to it repeatedly. Anyone who thinks, you know, COVID was an excuse for kind of party time, not at all. He said, I think at the end, two events may have gone longer than they should have done. So that's part of it, this idea that it was a difficult place. You know, we thought we were doing the right thing. Everybody thought they were doing the right thing. And then the second part, which gets to the, you know, did he mislead Parliament intentionally or not, is him saying, look, I did get these repeated reassurances. And that, it seems to me, was where there was more of a problem, an obvious problem with the committee of MPs, because they were saying, well, hang on a minute, was it enough to get reassurances from two people in your press office, two political advisors?
And Alice, is that where you see the key to these deliberations of the committee as to whether or not he did mislead Parliament?
I think certainly from what we've seen this afternoon, that really did look as though that was one of the hardest bits for Johnson, that line of questioning about the nature of the assurances he received. So Harriet Harman, who was chairing the hearing, who chairs the committee, was saying that these assurances seemed to be kind of very flimsy. I think that's something then that the committee will be looking at in terms of this question of whether he might have been reckless with what he said to Parliament. Was he taking sufficient care to ensure that what he said was accurate? Were the assurances that he received, you know, sort of robust? So that certainly felt like that was a difficult line of questioning for him and will be important for them.
Rob, do you feel we learnt anything particularly new this afternoon? I mean, we've sat through hours of the former Prime Minister's testimony, but have we learnt anything new? Have we seen any kind of smoking gun or any clinching piece of evidence either way?
God, it's a tricky question, Ben. I mean, I suppose the short answer is no, not really. I mean, we've seen more of the same, and I think it essentially gets down to this. You know, I mean, is it a question of belief? I guess it is. I mean, Boris Johnson essentially saying, look, I thought these work events, you know, where we were outside, there was a bit of wine, you know, I was saying goodbye to someone, yes, there was wine on that. He thinks all of that counts as being fine, right? That's, you know, his worldview is.
And part of his job as Prime Minister to thank staff for their hard work. That's his case.
Exactly. Now, the question is, what will people who are following lockdown regulations in this country, maybe in others, what will they think? Well, they think, it doesn't look like work to me. And you know, in the end, that's a very difficult question to resolve, and I think what Mr. Johnson has been trying to do, at least with the MPs, because, you know, yes, this is a case being made to the wider public, but it's to these MPs. I think he's trying to kind of plant a seed of doubt in their minds about whether, you know, you really could go as far as saying that he intentionally misled Parliament.
Alice, what about the committee? And because he was asked about sort of his views of the Privileges Committee, you know, whether he thinks, as some of his supporters perhaps do, that it's, you know, it's biased against him, it's a kangaroo court, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most interesting parts, actually, of the whole session. So throughout the session, what we saw was a lot of very detailed, specific questioning about who knew what and when and what was going on. But towards the end, Sir Charles Walker, who is a veteran Conservative MP, very experienced, has chaired various select committees himself, he actually wanted to ask Johnson about some of the things that sort of some of Johnson's allies have been saying. So this idea that the Privileges Committee is a so-called kangaroo court, these kinds of allegations. And what I think was notable is that, and to some extent this happened throughout the session, while Johnson appeared to, you know, emphasise that he understood why the committee was doing this, that he accepted its work, that he saw this hearing as a useful exercise, he also very strongly implied that he would reserve judgment on whether he felt that the committee has been fair until after he has seen what it has recommended. And I think it's worth bearing in mind here that members of the current government, so Penny Mordaunt, the leader of the House of Commons, said in the Commons last week that she and colleagues would take a dim view of anybody trying to put pressure on the committee. The Speaker of the Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, had to write to MPs today saying sort of very much the same thing. And so I think for Johnson to sort of imply that he would reserve judgment on the fairness of the committee and its work until he's seen what they have said is quite a dangerous path for him to tread.
And just lastly, Rob, quick question. If this all goes wrong for Boris Johnson, he could end up being suspended from the House.
Yes, he could. I just echo what Alice was saying. I mean, that was one of the most dramatic moments because it was a moment of menace from Boris Johnson. He was essentially saying, look, I'll rate your committee depending on the verdict I get. To answer your question, Ben, I mean, at the sort of extreme end of the spectrum for Boris Johnson in terms of unpleasant outcomes, the committee could recommend that the House suspends him for 10 days or more, in which case that would potentially trigger a by-election in which, of course, he could lose his seat. But there's an awful lot of ifs before you get to that end of the spectrum, Ben.
OK. For the moment, thank you very much, both of you, our political correspondent Rob Watson and Alice Lilly, senior researcher at the Institute for Government. And let's also get the thoughts of James Heal, who's the diary editor at The Spectator magazine. James, good to have you with us. Well, what did you make of it all? Quite a piece of political theatre, really, televised, several hours long. I'm sure a lot of people will have been quite engrossed.
Yes, I think it was quite microcosmic of the whole wider Partygate story of the past 2-3 years, in which you saw a bit of drama, at times a bit of farce as well. Boris Johnson ducking and diving and trying to avoid some of the critics landing a blow on him. But I think that after 3 years of this been dragging on in various forms, I think that there was a lot of heat but not much light shed. The rehearsed positions of both sides were so well known that the first hour basically was largely a write-off, also with the votes going on. And so I think that there wasn't so much we found out in terms of new from Boris Johnson, perhaps, but I think it was some telling lines of how the committee with their questions were very interesting in terms of Sir Charles Walker, of course, making clear that this wasn't a kangaroo court and getting Boris Johnson's agreement on that, but also about, you know, how credible Boris Johnson's assurances were that there was a difference between guidelines and rules. And also what the kind of level of dependence he was having on what number 10 advisors were telling him. And Harriet Harman didn't seem too impressed by that, which I thought was just interesting.
What did you make of Boris Johnson's performance in this piece of theatre, if that's what it was, because he's often accused of being a bit chaotic, a bit shambolic, a bit all over the place. But, you know, he seemed to have done a lot of preparation for this. He'd had a haircut as well, it looked like. So what did he make for that?
Yes, I mean, it was 3 hours long, but twice as long as the last time he gave evidence before a panel of MPs, which was the infamous liaison committee when it was the day before he resigned as Prime Minister. So this was twice as long, and that's quite a grilling. And you saw at times a lot of sort of flashes of anger across his face. He seemed a bit rattled. That's perhaps unsurprising. I think that he sort of, there was the worst bit of tension was sort of halfway through, but then he sort of pulled it back together, and depending on the lines of questions. I think that what was really telling, he's sort of stuck in purgatory as a result of this. He didn't land, you know, a knockout blow on his critics, but they couldn't knock him out as well. So it seems a bit of a score draw at the end of all of that. And I do wonder, as your previous guest was saying, how many minds are really going to be changed at this point. And the question now comes about those 7 MPs and what they're going to do next.
And very briefly, what do you think they will do? What do you think their verdict will be?
Oh, I think that with 4 of 7 as Tories, I mean, there'll be a suspension, but I wonder if it'll be the 10-day suspension. I just think even whatever they think privately of him as the man, I think no one really in the Tory party wants a by-election right now, given the way the polls are going. OK, interesting. James Heal, thank you very much indeed from The Spectator magazine. And let's go back to our political correspondent, Leila Nathu, who's at Westminster with more reaction.
Then MPs here are starting to digest what they have just heard. One of those joining me now is Chris Bryant, the Labour MP. He was the chair of the Privileges Committee previously, before Harriet Harman took over. He recused himself from this inquiry, but very interesting to hear his thoughts now. Chris, thanks very much for being with us. What are your main takeaways from what you heard?
Of course, you should bear in mind that that means that I'm already biased, and I was biased before we even started this. But look, what I took away from it was, first of all, that for the very first time, Boris Johnson admitted that social distancing wasn't done properly in Downing Street. I believe that means that, therefore, the rules were broken, the guidance was broken, as was evidenced by the fact that the police gave so many fines. He refused to deny that he had said that this was the most socially undistanced workplace in the country, very notable. So I got the impression by the end that he knows perfectly well that the rules weren't followed. He's always known that the rules weren't perfectly followed, and he's always sort of tried to cover it up. Now, it's entirely up to the committee what they decide to do, what recommendation they make on the back of that. They'll decide whether, you know, there are aggravating circumstances like the fact that he's Prime Minister, he's a very senior person. You know, Parliament relies on ministers telling the truth. They'll look at whether he's corrected the record, and I note that at the end he still refuses to correct the record. Last May, long after all of this had been, you know, revealed to the public, he was still saying that all the guidance had been followed, and he was still saying it again today. So I think his mind is very, very muddled.
Do you think then that there are elements of what you heard today that were still not truthful? Because that is a very significant claim, given that he was under oath.
Yes, look, it was a mess, a lot of what he was saying. One minute he was saying we've got to rely on Sue Gray, and then the next moment he was saying Sue Gray is completely irrelevant and the committee shouldn't consider her report and so on. So a lot of it was a bit of a mess. There would be bits that I think that would really anger people. At one point he said he thought it was absolutely essential in Downing Street to have drinks dues to say farewell to people. But I've got constituents who would have loved to be able to say farewell to some of their loved ones, but they weren't even allowed in the room when they were dying. So I think that will stick in a lot of people's throat. And at one point he was asked quite an interesting question, which was, so if you'd been asked in one of the press conferences, is it fine for you to have a drinks due to say farewell to staff? You'd have said that was okay, would you? And he went, buh, 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 buh. So I think he must know deep in his heart that he's just got this wrong from the very beginning, but he can't own up to it. And that's a sadness. One other thing that I thought was interesting, he was pushed on the question of some people have been accusing this of being a kangaroo court and being completely improper process and all the rest of it. He denounced that. He said this isn't a kangaroo court, and obviously, therefore, he will abide by whatever the committee decides.
And just very briefly, how likely do you think that the committee is going to be able to agree a unified response?
Well, I know all the members of the committee, and I've worked with them very closely. It's a difficult process coming to a shared view, but I'm sure that that's what they will want to do, because I thought they were really forensic. They were careful. There was no showboating, nobody showing off. I thought the committee did a really good job, and in a sense, this is a unique moment. No Prime Minister or former Prime Minister has ever been hauled before a Privileges Committee in this way. And it's important. I think the voters want to know that when a minister stands up in the Commons, you can rely that what they're saying is true, and if it's not, that they'll correct the record as soon as they've worked out that it's not.
Chris Bryant, thank you very much for joining us with those thoughts. We've been discussing, haven't we, whether this appearance is going to change people's minds. I think Chris Bryant here, a case in point that it has not.
All right, Layla, thank you very much indeed. Layla Nathi there, our political correspondent at Westminster. Meanwhile, also in the UK Parliament, MPs have voted in favour of a key part of the new agreement for implementing post-Brexit trading arrangements for Northern Ireland.
The ayes to the right, 515. The noes to the left, 29.
In the first of several votes on the deal, which is known as the Windsor Framework, only 29 MPs voted against the government's proposals, which have been agreed with Brussels. Those who oppose it include members of the Northern Ireland Democratic Unionist Party and several high-profile MPs from the governing Conservative Party as well. Now, just a line of breaking news on the rail strikes that have been affecting part of the rail network here in the UK. RMT workers from the rail union, the RMT, that union has announced that strikes by its members at 14 train companies have been suspended. These were scheduled to happen on the 30th of March and the 1st of April. They've been suspended after discussions with the rail delivery group today. The RMT had already called off action as concerns members of the Network Rail, which looks after the infrastructure and the tracks of the railway network. But now this is RMT members with the rail delivery group, the 14 train operating companies. They've also postponed or called off their strikes for the time being as well. So it looks like possibly a breakthrough on that rail strike there as well. The French President Emmanuel Macron has been defending his government's decision to increase the retirement age from 62 to 64. Mr. Macron's appeared in a televised interview today after days of widespread and often violent protests, which are continuing. The president said the changes are a necessity, not a luxury, and that he wants them in force by the end of the year. Opinion polls indicate the changes are deeply unpopular in France, and President Macron's critics have denounced his latest comments as arrogant. Well, the French government narrowly survived a vote of no confidence on Monday, having forced the legislation through the lower house of Parliament without a vote. Here's a clip of Mr. Macron during that televised interview.
There aren't 100 solutions if we want the pension system to be balanced. It no longer is. And the more we wait, the more it will get worse. And so this reform is necessary. And I say this to the French people. I don't enjoy doing this. I would prefer not to do this. But it is also because of a sense of responsibility.
So a pretty defiant Mr. Macron earlier on in that interview. Let's get some analysis from our Paris correspondent, Hugh Schofield.
Well, it was a 25 half-hour interview in which, as you say, he defended his decision to push through this bill using the controversial measure, the 49-3, as they call it here, to avoid a vote in Parliament. And he was robust and lucid about his decision to take this step. He said repeatedly that it was a necessity for the country. It wasn't a pleasant thing to do. It wasn't a luxury that he was indulging in. It was something which the country needed because, as he has said since the start of all this, the French, the very particular system that the French have in which people in work pay for those who are retired at the same time, will not survive the demographic changes unless there are these reforms to it. So he said, I am prepared to take on myself the unpopularity which is quite clearly out there, but that is my duty. I would rather take on this unpopularity than shirk my duty. He said there have been reforms in the past of the pension system, which is true. They've all triggered equal, if not worse, responses on the street, but they went ahead, and he would not be proud of his own record, not be able to sort of face himself in the mirror, effectively, if he didn't go ahead with this measure, this reform, which was necessary for the future of the country and for safeguarding future pensions. That's his message. It will not go down very well, of course, because, and the reactions already coming in from, from the opposition and from the street. Once again, he's accused of his normal arrogance and contempt for ordinary people. I don't think there's any serious hope of this convincing people who want to protest. It'll comfort those who broadly support the reforms. That's maybe a third of the country, but the other 2/3 will see him back in his own old form of the arrogant, Elysee-bound money man who's telling them how to run their lives.
Hugh Schofield, our Paris correspondent. There have been more Russian missile strikes in Ukraine, including one in the southeastern city of Zaporizhia. Officials say one person was killed and more than 30 injured when residential buildings were hit. Strikes also left 4 people dead in an overnight drone attack in the Kyiv region. Well, it comes as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has visited Ukrainian troops close to the front line in the area of the city of Bakhmut. Fighting there has been raging for more than 7 months. The Ukrainian leader handed out awards and was photographed with some Ukrainian soldiers. Well, our diplomatic correspondent James Landale is in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, with the latest.
President Zelensky's visit is very interesting. If you think about it, for the last couple of days, the news has all been about President Putin of Russia, him visiting Mariupol in occupied Ukraine, also then hosting President Xi of China in Moscow. I think this visit by President Zelensky to Bakhmut in the eastern part of Ukraine will be seen very much as a sort of diplomatic response to that, because Russia has been trying to seize Bakhmut for over 7 months. It's the longest battle of this war, and they have failed. So to that extent, Bakhmut has come to, if you like, epitomize not just Ukrainian resilience, but also the failure of Russia's president to achieve his immediate war aims. And so I think that is one of the signals that people will interpret from that, of President Zelensky saying, look, I'm still here, we're still standing, we're still defending. And as you say, at the same time, Western support continues. The message from the United States, from the IMF, is that more money will be forthcoming, about $15 billion to try and shore up Ukraine's economy, which, frankly, is doing very, very little at the moment. And so this state, this country, needs money from outside simply just to keep ticking over, to pay salaries, to keep bills being paid, while the war is being fought.
James Landale reporting from Kyiv. The United Nations is warning of an approaching global water crisis because of pollution, global warming and overconsumption. It's published a new report on the issue just before the first dedicated water summit in more than 40 years. Consumption of water keeps on rising, and the report says around 10% of the world's population lives under what is called water stress, where the ratio of water use to availability is considered high or critical. At the last assessment in 2020, more than a quarter of people around the world still lacked access to safe drinking water, while 3.6 billion people lacked access to safely managed sanitation services. The report says the water crisis is worst in low-income countries. For example, an estimated 70% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa lacks safe drinking water services. Here's Aruna Iyengar.
Humanity's lifeblood, water, is increasingly at risk around the world due to vampiric overconsumption and overdevelopment. That's the language used in the UN report.
10% of the global population currently lives in areas that are high or critical water stress. In our report, we said that up to 3.5 billion people live under conditions of water stress at least 1 month a year.
The meeting in New York is asking governments and the private sector to come up with a water action agenda to meet a goal set in 2015 to ensure access to water and sanitation for all by 2030. The UN says up to half the world's population doesn't have access to sanitation and a quarter doesn't have access to a safe water supply. It blames unsustainable water use, pollution and unchecked global warming. The UN is now calling for a change in attitude towards water as a shared resource.
The global water cycle is a global common good. We just don't want to understand it because we believe water belongs to us. We need to invest with that in our minds.
The report notes that water scarcity has the greatest impact on poorer people and children. UNICEF had recently warned that 190 million children in 10 African countries don't have access to clean water. The UN says current levels of investment would have to be tripled to get safe drinking water for all by 2030. Aruna Iyengar, BBC News.
The reconstruction of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris has undergone many challenges in the 4 years since it was gutted by fire. And now, with much of the structural work done, teams there are narrowing their focus to recreate the famous statue said to be its protectors from harm. Stephanie Prentice reports.
They sit up high on historic buildings, tasked with redirecting rainwater from roofs, and also said to provide spiritual protection from the wrath of heaven by scaring off evil spirits. No self-respecting cathedral could operate without its gargoyles. But some of them didn't survive the fire in 2019. And a dozen of France's finest sculptors were called in.
It's very fine. There are edges that are very fine, well drawn. We have to reproduce them as they were originally done. It's our duty.
These new creatures are being made out of clay or huge blocks of stone shipped down the Seine, but some of the older ones are also being saved.
This
is not a Viollet-le-Duc. It is older. I think it dates from a restoration in the 18th century. You can recognise the style. It is very busy. You can see on the column that there are lots of little spikes.
Each piece takes at least 3 weeks to complete. And after that, of course, the task of getting them into position begins.
These are stones that will now be part of the cathedral for 400, 500, 600 years. This is another element that shows that the cathedral is rising from its ashes.
And Notre Dame, or Our Lady, is set to rise again as Paris's Gothic masterpiece in 2024. Stephanie Prentice, BBC News.
25 people have been injured after a ship tipped over at a dockyard in Edinburgh. The Scottish Ambulance Service said 15 people were taken to hospital and 10 were treated at the scene of the incident at Imperial Dock in Leith. A major incident was declared after the research vessel Petrel became dislodged from its holding. Just a reminder of our top story today then. The former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has denied misleading Parliament. He's been giving testimony to a parliamentary committee that will determine whether or not he deliberately misled MPs about attending lockdown parties during the pandemic. You've been watching BBC News.
The Privileges Committee not relying on any such material, and nor will we. Last November, we decided we'll be talking about rules.
As millions of people were locked down last year, was a Christmas party thrown in Downing Street?
Hello, good evening. It was very blustery today, particularly across northern and western areas of Scotland. Also, some heavy thundery showers moving eastwards on that brisk southwesterly wind. But it wasn't raining all the time. There were some decent sunny spells around too, as recorded by our weather watcher here in York. Lots of blue sky here. And no big changes in the forecast as we head through the next couple of days or so. Still unsettled, more wet and windy weather to come. Also some sunshine, and it stays mild until we get to the weekend, but still very blustery, particularly towards exposed western coast. There are some flood warnings in force. Do keep checking the BBC weather website for more details. Large waves and some coastal overtopping, particularly with the high spring tides. And it stays windy too overnight tonight. These bands of showers moving through. Heavier rain across Northern Ireland, moving towards northwest England by the time we get to dawn. But lots of clear skies around, and it will feel a bit cooler, I think, for most than it was last night. Temperatures for many down to mid-single figures. Maybe a touch of frost just in sheltered rural spots of Scotland. Now, low pressure dominates, of course, still on Thursday. Various systems waiting out in the Atlantic. They'll be whizzing eastwards, giving us more wet and windy spells of weather. But for many, I think it will be a sunny start to the day on Thursday. These showers will get going as we head through the late morning into the afternoon, moving eastwards. Some longer spells of rain too, moving into southern England, southeast England and East Anglia, perhaps by the end of the day. And it stays very blustery. A brisk southwesterly wind again, especially towards western coastal areas. The air is still mild. Temperatures again above the seasonal average between 12 and 15 degrees Celsius. Let's take a look at Friday. It's more of the same. In fact, it could be the windiest day of the week for England and Wales. Some more heavy, thundery downpours moving through on that brisk wind. There could be some lightning and some hail around at times. The showers a bit more well scattered across Scotland. It's still mild too. Temperatures between 10 and 14 degrees Celsius. But that's all about to change as we head through the weekend. Why? Well, because we're drawing a northerly wind. This cold Arctic air is set to sink its way southwards as we head through Saturday and eventually into Sunday as well. There could be some showers that will have some winteriness in them, some snow perhaps even to lower levels, and a widespread hard frost on Sunday and Monday nights.
Hello, hi, sorry, I had to go out. It's over, it's finished, go home. This cough isn't getting any better. Right, thanks for watching. And yeah, whether Boris Johnson gets his comeuppance or not is still yet to be seen. I've got a feeling that you know, he won't, because he's a gobshite and he'll probably get away with it because that's what gobshites do. But yeah, painful as that is to say. Anyway, right. So thanks for watching. I'll be back tomorrow at 9 o'clock for another round of War on Error. Until then, I'll say thanks for watching. And hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.